Uh, Carrie, I have everyone in. Oh, no, there's another one. But I think if you would like to unmute and convene us and get started, you can go ahead and I'll continue to let them in. We've got 87. There'll be more, but I can take care of that while you're running the show.
Am I running the show?
You are the Vernon and SU chair, and that's where we're starting. So, but you're chairing. I'll manage the logistics. Nobody told you that, huh?
So I guess we have to call 3 meetings to order. So I'll start by calling the Vernon meeting to order because I do see Chad, Carrie, Hannah, and Walter. Walter, I think, can only be with us till 5:30. So Walter, I will be clerk for us, so you don't have to worry about that. So I'm calling Vernon to order at 5:04. And then I see Anne. I see David. Is Kelly Young here?
Yes, yeah, she came in.
Okay, Kelly's here.
And you're here.
So who am I missing?
I think it's Michelle.
Michelle, is Michelle here?
Let me see. Yes, so we're all here.
All right, so I will also now call the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union Board to order at 5:04.
Okay, and I will call the Windham Southeast School District Board to order at 5:04 as well. So here we are.
All right, so I guess first thing on the agenda is let's turn it over to Andy to, I guess, give us a presentation of what we are looking at tonight.
Thank you, Carrie. So, David, I need to have screen share enabled,
let me,
David.
Yep, I will get there. Screen share.
So the reason why we're meeting tonight is we want to review some of the critical federal guidelines and documents, and it's kind of in a very shortened form that came to us from Pietro Lynn. And really this is for informational purposes, and we're going to be leading up to 4 critical questions, and I'll ask those questions for you at the start. And those will be I want you to think about those as we talk throughout the presentation. First question is does the board consider COVID-19 to be an emergency? The second question would be, for the purposes of any leave requests, if the board considers COVID-19 to be an emergency, that would remove the 45-day emergency leave of absence request component. Would the board be able to work within 5 days to approve those requests? The third question to think about would be, would the board work in concert with school administration, central office administration, and looking at approving those requests? And the final one is kind of a really finite detail. And you'll see why it pertains as we go through. Is the board willing to authorize the superintendent to engage in an MOU with the teacher and support professional unions to create an MOU that would reduce the number of days for absences requesting a doctor's note from 5 to 3 just for COVID-like symptoms? And we can talk about that as we go. So I'll share my screen now and kind of get into some of the details in terms of what we received. So the information I think I can share my screen.
There we go. There we go. Great.
So with last year, people were provided a measure of kind of flexibility with requesting leaves. A lot of those leaves last year expired as of June 30th. And so the part of the language that's coming up is that really employees are, we won't get into the language this came to us from Pietro, but the important thing is to know that the law really, requires that we have new requests for things if people need a leave of absence request. A caveat with all of this work. So those leave of absence requests that were present last year, those are now expired. People would have to submit new ones. We want to make sure that our staff is aware of that. The most important thing is here, we are creating a safe opening for our employees, and the work around safety is really what's driving everything with everyone. So as with always, and with any discussion about health and health risks, that really starts with the discussion with one's doctor. Individuals who are at higher risk of severe illness from COVID-19 are really encouraged to speak to their doctor about returning to work. Again, we're creating a safe space for our students. We're creating a safe space that's focusing on building community and relationships. But we want people to feel comfortable, and we still want to find that balance of our faculty and staff being comfortable in their discomfort around the virus, but at the same time being able to open safely for everyone. And so the Vermont Department of Health and the Agency of Education have provided this information on the following slides that describe really what's available to under federal law to employees. And this doesn't really constitute as medical advice. I've said before, I was a liberal arts major in college. I was not a science person, and do not want to give out medical advice to people. So for vulnerable staff population, and we know the definition of vulnerable staff population are people that are teachers or staff members that are ages 65 and older, or that may have some serious underlying health conditions. We're encouraging everyone of that nature to talk with their healthcare provider to really assess their risks. Again, we're focusing on safety, and we want people to be comfortable within the environment. And in the event that they would need to avoid people or come into close contact with someone in times when physical distancing can't be maintained. So based on what we know, the people that are at higher risk for severe illnesses from COVID-19 are individuals 65 and over, people of all ages with underlying medical conditions, particularly if not well controlled, including people with lung disease or asthma, people with serious heart conditions, those that are immunocompromised, people with a body mass index of 40 or higher, people with diabetes or chronic kidney, or those undergoing dialysis, or people with liver disease. And so those are the high risk factors. And within those individuals, there are protections that the law provides for our staff within those populations. So some of the things that are made, and this is again kind of an informational component that PHR provided us. And so when we start talking around acronyms, and education is rife with acronyms, there is a level of different types of leave that can be requested with appropriate certifications. And so there's the paid leave under the Families First Corona Response Act, also known as the FFCRA. Jobs that are protected leave under the Family Medical Leave Act, the FMLA, or the Vermont Parental and Family Leave Law, the VPFL, for those who qualify. There's also available and appropriate personal paid leave under contract. There's unpaid leave under the Americans with Disabilities Act as amended, the ADAA, for those who qualify, and unpaid leaves of absence for a specific duration. So in addition to the leaves outlined above, there's special considerations that might be available for those with higher risk, but who are interested in returning to work. So some of those special accommodations and considerations might be, can we provide personal protective equipment to those folks? That would then go through and eliminating their exposure. Is this a mask? Is this an enhanced mask? Is this a face shield, body protection? Again, we are working with our health and safety group to identify what are the protections we can put into place. If someone says, I'm not entirely comfortable, can you work with me on this? We want to make sure that people feel comfortable, or at least as comfortable in their discomfort as possible. Remote work may be considered if an employee can efficiently and effectively conduct the essential functions of their job remotely. We'll talk about remote work in a second and what that might look like and how we could get there, because that's one of the bigger questions. So the Family First Corona Relief Act, it's divided things into two different categories. There's emergency paid family and medical leave, otherwise known as EFML, and emergency paid sick leave. Now, key provisions under the Families First Corona Relief Act are kind of summarized in the following pages. It's important to know that these leave benefits are set to expire on December 31st of this year. And unless there's some reauthorization of that work, we don't, right now, the current law is set up so that they expire at the end of this calendar year, not the end of the school year. So the Emergency Family Medical Leave Act, people that would qualify for that, again, this may impact some of our staff. These are employees who are unable to work or telework because they need to care for their child whose school is closed, or whose child care provider is unable to because of COVID-19 or some other similar public health emergency. And this would be eligible to any employee who's been employed a minimum of 30 days within any of the SD, the Vernon School District, or the SU. And so compensation by law under this is the first 10 days of VFML is unpaid, but employees could elect to substitute other paid leave benefits during this time period, like paid vacation days or other sick leave. After the first 10 days, employees using the EFML would be paid 2/3 their regular compensation up to a max of $200 a day or $10,000 total in aggregate. And the FMLA job protections apply to this. And so within this work, we want to make sure that there are protections for our employees if they're unfortunately in a position that they have to take this. So the certification with that, though, within that level of work is, there has to be appropriate documentation that would allow us to move forward with that. The emergency paid sick leave, that's the employees are subject to the federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order due to COVID-19. And we'll kind of get into some of this work down the road. We can be really careful around APSL. The employee's been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine. The employee is experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 and is seeking a medical diagnosis. The employee is caring for an individual who's quarantined. The employee is caring for a son or daughter if the school, place, or care of the child's been closed, or the employee is experiencing any other substantially similar condition as specified by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And so those 1 through 3 and 4 are a little different in terms of compensation from 5 and 6. It's come up in several conversations of how does someone use their EPSL time if we are requiring someone to quarantine because of exposure in the schools. And we want to make sure that we're protecting employees and structuring something so there is a limit to the number of days that they can use for EPSL. So the duration of the EPSL is up to 2 weeks. And so there's no carryover of leave allowed from the payout if there's any sort of separation of employment. But this is really 2 weeks that are allowed. And for the compensation for items 1 through 4, it's $511 a day. And then for items 5 and 6, it's up to a max of $200 a day. And so the certification for that, in terms of the documentation, we have paperwork that we'll have available with our central office, with our human resources director. You would just have to, teachers or staff would have to apply some sort of acceptable documentation supporting the need. And they would work directly with the human resources director on that. So the other piece that falls into this, under teacher contract provisions, and this is the initial conversation that we started when we want to think about the framing of the questions, is that unpaid leave of absences are a contract provision under the master agreement for our teachers. The critical language in this I highlighted because generally unpaid leave of absences are subject to a 45-day advance period. So the critical piece is really, except in the case of an emergency, a teacher proposing to take an unpaid leave of absence shall make an application there for at least 45 days in advance of the date upon which he or she proposes to commence, and the board will notify that teacher within 30 days. And so that kind of leads up to the question around one, will the board consider COVID an emergency? It's a little more broadly defined than one would expect to find in an unpaid leave, because we're going to apply that standard across the whole group of teachers. But this gives us gives us some of that freedom to allow teachers to retain the benefits of what the contract provides for them. And we'll kind of show why that's important as we go through the slides. Also critical to this is a teacher who takes unpaid leave of absence. This is 28.7D. They are still entitled to benefits under the bargain agreement, provided that the teacher remits the district monthly in advance the premium payments. And this would be in conjunction with the carrier. But this is a little different than saying to somebody, you've got to pay for COBRA. But you would be responsible. It would be similar probably in cost to COBRA, but it would be different than what COBRA is, because they would be entitled to those, as long as they're making the full premium payments, including the district share of that. It's a steep amount of money, but it allows some people that access to do so. And so that's kind of important within in this criteria to consider. So some common questions that come up from time to time around this, and this is, some of the things that we're hearing from teachers across the country. I hear it within my friend circles. I feel anxious about returning to work. Where can I get help? We have an employee assistant, Invest EAP. It's a free counseling service. We would encourage people to use Invest EAP if we have we need some support getting through the pandemic. We want to make sure that people feel supported and comfortable. That EAP is a wonderful way to have someone else to talk to. The other question that comes up is like, what happens if I have more than one qualifying event under the emergency paid sick leave time? And that's that act that gives people the benefit of 14 days or 2 weeks of coverage. And I think I keep going back to the list of parallels, the list of synonyms I have for unprecedented, because we do recognize that COVID-19 is unprecedented, it's unparalleled. We want to make sure that we have further discussions with our bargaining units to talk about what's the nature of the origin of the required quarantine. So if a staff member is exposed to COVID-19 within the schools, and we're hoping we have enough protections around the perimeter of the schools, and we have enough safety protocols in place where that won't happen. But if there is something that occurs under close contact, that we have the flexibility in place to allow that teacher to work remotely and not have them required to take emergency paid sick leave time. And so we're continuing to work to support our teachers and make sure our teachers have the benefit that they would be entitled to do so if they were exposed to COVID-19 in the community, which would require an emergency paid sick leave. So that's up to that total of 2 weeks, and then we would, if there was another exposure for someone, there's other unpaid leaves and other leaves of absences that people could request to do so. And another question that comes up, if my child's school closes for periods of time, can I take EFML intermittently? And it can be used intermittently up through December 31st. And again, this is federal guidelines if we're waiting for the extension of these acts, or if there'll be new acts authorized. And once EFML and EPSL are exhausted, can I access my available paid leave under contract? And the answer is you may be able to access available vacation, personal floating, or sick leave with medical certification for reasons 1 through 3 in those categories, and then for reasons 4 through 6 under EPSL, as we talked about in the previous documentation slides. They may be able to access those things with acceptable and available certification around that. You can't leave, in some cases, sick leave can't be used to access things like childcare if a school's closed, but we would want to work with our staff for those purposes to see what we can make work. So if someone exhausts it all, and what's available to them would depend upon the circumstances, but unpaid leave could be considered for our staff. And for people that have given up the right to continue health insurance, they do have availability of purchasing COBRA for 18 months. And I'm going through this quickly because I know we're going to have some questions around it. If I access EFML or EPSL with a leave count against my annual 12 weeks of FMLA, should I have a different qualifying FMLA event? And any kind of leave from EFML and EPSL under federal law would be counted against FMLA. This factors into when we're looking at emergency paid sick leave. If there's a quarantining condition, we want to make sure that we're working with our families and our teachers regarding these items, and so that we're demonstrating the flexibility that we can under the law. And then what do I do if I come down with COVID-19 symptoms? We want to be pretty direct with our employees that if people are sick, we want them to make sure that they use their sick time. One of the suggestions here, and this is where the MOU aspect comes into, is that if people are suffering COVID-like symptoms, which would be cough, fever, shortness of breath, chills, fatigue, muscle pain, or body aches, headache, sore throat, loss of taste or smell, congestion, runny nose, nausea, vomiting, or diarrhea, we are encouraging our employees to contact their healthcare provider and providing us with medical certification if they're out more than 3 consecutive days. Now, the contract states 5 days, and this is where we'd like to have an MOU where we could work with the union just for this kind of very narrow range of symptoms around COVID, and that is for public health purposes. It's not as a means to to do anything else, and we would be a short-term MOU while the COVID pandemic continues. Some other questions, what should I do if I come into close contact with someone who tested positive for COVID-19? We would want people to follow the Department of Health guidance, which requires that self-quarantining for 14 days or self-quarantining for 7 days, followed by a negative COVID-19 test. That paid leave could be available to it. And what happens if someone comes into close contact with someone who's diagnosed with COVID-19 at work, and would they have to quarantine? The long answer is that we would work with the Department of Health around this. But in this case, I highlighted the idea that you may be assigned remote work during the period of quarantine. So for our purposes, if we're assigning if someone is able to work remotely with a required quarantine from work, that I would advocate that we don't have to charge the emergency paid sick leave, but we would allow the person to continue working as if they were working remotely in the springtime for those items. So, and then one other question that comes up is if I'm approved for leave, can I switch back and forth? And unfortunately, once someone's approved for leave, it would be for the duration, and they would have to continue that leave through the duration. And that's because we have to hire people to fill those slots. And a few more common questions. I was diagnosed with COVID-19 and believe I may have contracted at work. What should you do? Basically, contact HR, contact our human resources office in the district, and the insurance carrier would make reasonable efforts to conduct an investigation. And if I'm a teacher, I think this is the last question we pulled. If I'm a teacher and I'd like to continue to work remotely, is this an option for me? We'll talk about that in a second. Student management and working within students in the building is an essential role of being a teacher. It's an essential function. And the working remotely is also viewed as a reasonable accommodation for people that have critical accommodations requested under the Americans with Disability Act amended. So there's some kind of flexibility with it, but this may not be as flexible as we would always like it to be. So the process that we are proposing is that we will have paperwork and request kind of some of the information from this, as well as contact information we would send out tomorrow to our staff. Paperwork would be due requesting if staff were requesting an accommodation under the, for remote work or other accommodations, for instance, that paperwork would be due to the HR director by the 17th. The HR director would review accommodation and other leave requests. They would assign the ADA accommodation request within each school site first. And so there's a tiered process with this so that it's objective and as fair as we can be. If we have more than one request for a remote teaching accommodation per school site with or an excess number of requests versus the availability per school site, a lottery would be conducted within each school site. Once those are filled, it would go from the school site then to any existing spots across the district if there are remote openings, if there still needed a certification match. Once filled, the HR director would conduct that second lottery for requests for those without approved accommodating situations. So the school sites, meanwhile, simultaneously are identifying the final list of student requests by the 14th. And so they're going to start a process this week of identifying which families want remote learning, because that's the piece that drives how many remote teaching slots that we have available as an accommodation for staff that are impacted. So the remote student cohorts will be selected and communicated to HR no later than the 17th of August. And we continue to, that will then feed the pool of candidates that would be available for remote learning. It's a little complicated with multiple pieces moving at once, but it will function together. So by the 19th of August, the HR director would inform schools of the remote teacher placements and other leave requests, and that's by that date. It could be earlier. And then when the HR director would notify staff if those requests for remote instruction are not able to be accommodated, and have a conversation with people over what are their next steps and what are their options. And again, this is just for people whose requests for remote teaching instruction may not be available. By that point, the principals will also have, all the schedules will be nailed down. People will have a sense of class sizes, who's teaching what what the day looks like will be nailed down, especially as we phase in our reentry. And then our HR director would notify principals if all the remote requests have been filled and openings remain, and then principals would interview for those last remaining spots in the building. So it starts with HR. The school sites are removed from some of the process at the initial onset to make sure that we're complying with federal guidelines. And then the last step along the way, if there are any openings or requests that need to be filled, the principals would interview within their faculty about people to do that. So some questions that teachers may have. You know, who do I contact if I have questions or need forms? The HR director will be the best person to contact. We'll announce that individual's name on Monday. She's out for a couple of days, but she'll be starting officially on Monday. But I have some copies of forms that I can send out to people in the interim tomorrow. What do I do if I think I have a qualifying need or leave for an accommodation? Please contact healthcare providers and human resources. Healthcare providers also have the ADA forms, and they can identify what would be a reasonable accommodation. Is remote teaching the only accommodation available? Nope, accommodations, they can include remote teaching, but that category is pretty broad. In some cases, an accommodation for someone may be a plexiglass screen for a secretary that may work in an office and needs to have some level of barrier between them. A plexiglass screen could be considered an accommodation. So where do I start if I want to pursue a leave? Well, we need to remember that pursuing any sort of a leave is a personal decision for anyone. And the HR director is really here to help people walk through their thoughts. The HR director can't make a decision for someone, but they are certainly here to serve as a sounding board, to provide you feedback, to answer questions, to support you in your work as you kind of wrestle and struggle with this really, really deeply challenging position. Why can't my school principal determine who's able to teach remotely? And this has come up from a couple teachers that have reached out to me. Really, remote accommodations generally been viewed thus far as an accommodation. And because of that, that assignment has to really be done in accordance with federal employment law first. And so we want to make sure that we're first looking at those remote teaching positions as complying with the Americans with Disabilities Act amended and providing us that opportunity to give those most impacted people that spot. And then if there are openings further, we would do that. So why don't we have more teaching spots or remote teaching spots? Well, we're also bound by our budget. We can't add 100 teachers to the payroll and create 100 more teaching spots as much as we would like to. Our number of remote teaching spots is really driven by the student need and the number of staff we have in each building. In some cases, we may have some cross-building matchups if the numbers function well enough to do that. Especially if the numbers would require smaller cohorts from smaller schools to combine together, we would look at that. But it's really driven by the student demand and student need for remote teaching, whether it's a student health issue or other reasons. So a couple of the big categories that happen, well, what happens to me if there isn't a remote spot for me and I need one? We would encourage people to contact their HR director around that. And they'll walk us through the different options that may be available for us and available for those staff members that may be in that category. And then what do I do if I fall into a high risk category, but I want to work? And again, these are things this is a deeply personal decision for anyone and we know that our teachers are wrestling and grappling with this. We would encourage any staff members to contact their healthcare practitioner and HR to determine any accommodations needed for in-person instruction. If people have a qualifying condition but they want to work, we would still encourage you to contact your healthcare provider so that we can provide the accommodations necessary for you to be comfortable and successful in the building, whether that's additional PPE or additional items in your room. We want to work with you and your healthcare provider to make sure that we're supporting you. I think. So some questions to consider, and this kind of gets back, this is what I started with. And this is where we would ask for some action on. Would the board consider COVID-19 an emergency? So if the board does consider COVID-19 an emergency, would the board be able to approve unpaid leave of absence requests within 5 days that would allow us to get back to the employees as well as post for these positions that would be opened up as a result? Would the board work in concert with our central office administration for the approval of leave of absence requests to ensure that we have really the implementation of a safe school environment for everyone, And the last question, I apologize, I missed the question mark on that, but it's also overly wordy. Would you authorize me to enter into an MOU with the union if the unions so agreed, to have a very, very finite description for where we would want to go from 5 days to 3 days for medical notes. And it's really just around COVID-19 symptoms, and that's all for public health reasons. And that we would want to have some sort of an MOU. And I think that was yep, that is the end of my presentation there. So David, I can stop sharing my screen.
Okay.
If I can figure out how to do that.
Well, I think I can do it for you. Nope.
Oh, there we go. Stop share.
Good.
So I apologize. I've rambled on through 20 slides and PowerPoint for doing that. But I figured that this was information that was going to be helpful for you to have to deliberate some of these big questions around how we can start staffing and making sure that we're ensuring a safe space for everyone.
All right, thank you. Questions? Why don't we start with questions from the board and whichever board you're on. David, I take it you can see hands raised?
I can, yeah, and I'll call out the names. Well, people are slow to consider the questions, so actually I'll ask a couple of mine if it's okay, Carrie.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Andy, the August 17th will be enough time, or the staff will have had an opportunity to see what their assignments actually look like. And I know you just sent out a memo about the safety steps and emergency protections that are in place. But that's enough time for them to know what the job is that they're being asked to do, and how many students are going to be in that room, and how well the room is ventilated, and be assured of access of masks, and just all the other precautions that are being taken. Will people have, basically, will they have the information they need to decide whether they're willing to take a chance?
Yeah, I believe we'll have all that. It's in various stages. Our principals have been incredibly thoughtful around how they're building their programs and kind of working within the flexibility necessary to have a degree of staffing equity across the entire district. And they've been incredibly responsive to the needs of and advocates for their staff at that. And so I think by that point, I would also encourage, if people have questions around what does the beginning of the year look like, if staff have questions, that they would reach out to their principals to also weigh in. The principals, I will say, have been incredible advocates for their staff, and they want to get this information out as soon as possible. And then with that, they've been working to create ways that help environments be as small and as safe as possible for students. As we think about the reopening, we're thinking about things as a phased in reopening to getting more of our kids into the building. And the principals have been working to design schedules to meet those needs that are also allowing that degree of equity across the district within all our classroom spaces.
And this is a couple of things. One is, you mentioned accommodations, and were there other accommodations in remote? And I'm wondering about if the number is not huge, that people can be reassigned, and it's easier if they're willing to be, but it is something to be done. Could people who, if it's not a huge number and it's possible, could they be reassigned to things like following up with families remotely, following up with families that aren't participating effectively remotely, or even providing remote or tutoring support for students that teachers identify as needing more support than they have time in their sort of office hour period to do, or other sorts of accommodations like that we know are going to be needed, or don't know are going to be needed, but will show up. Is it possible to to consider those kinds of options?
I think we have to consider the remote teaching aspect pretty narrowly. The amount of time and effort it takes to develop remote instruction, as well as the load we're placing upon our classrooms. And what we've said with to support our teachers in the building, what I've encouraged the principals to do is be really conservative about staffs, about class sizes for the in-person instruction. I'll say our smaller buildings have less of flexibility to do that. I know that the principals at the smaller schools, I know are really grappling with how can we make these work. And so the compensatory way to balance that out to make the spaces smaller, is to make the remote groups a little bit larger, and that creates the physical distancing guidelines within the room. So I don't know if they will have the staff, the ability to staff people around to have those check-ins. Certainly they can look at what are some of the roles of non-instructional personnel to reach out to people, or if there are other staff members that aren't necessarily a classroom teacher, but may need some level of requirement to look at what can we do for those folks.
Great.
We have to look at what are we doing to staff the classrooms that are for the in-person learning primarily though.
Great. And one more.
Yes.
In one of the communications, and I don't recall where from, but somewhere it mentioned unemployment insurance as an option under some situations.
Yeah.
And then the other question is the affordable, if someone is on unemployment and can they qualify for the Affordable Care Act?
Yeah, I would defer. We would have to have our HR director when she starts officially to dig into that.
Well, I hope she's watching and she can write
Yes.
that down in her minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Andy.
Yep.
Carrie, Emily has her hand up.
Go for it, Emily.
So I have a little list that I'm compiling here.
Emily, you asked the hardest questions too.
What can I say? So when you said unpaid leave, you were requesting that the board, maybe change the rules about unpaid leave so that we could approve it more quickly. I guess I wonder, does that always follow the emergency leave, or would that just be for all leaves?
This would be just right now. So right now we're looking at, under the contract, the board has 30 days to approve. One, we would have to consider COVID an emergency. And I think, I don't want to speak for the board, but I think that we would assume that if COVID is an emergency, the board would still have under contract 30 days to approve any emergency leave request. And I'm taking, so usually in contractual language, that emergency is applied individually. I'd like to take that individual standard and apply it broadly to the entire bargaining unit. And so that in and of itself could be a stretch, but it does give us some relief for some of the bigger questions about what do we do? If that answer is yes, then it's like, can the board make a determination with central office and 5 days? And that's mostly because we need to staff the rooms. And so that was the reason for the asking to kind of move it beyond the 30, to move it up from that.
Okay. So it would include, like, if somebody was taking another type of unpaid leave, it would, because we changed the bargaining agreement, all those would kind of come under that 5 day.
I would say it's just for the emergency ones.
Okay, just
we would look at. So if someone says, hey, I won Powerball and I'm going to take a unquarantined trip somewhere, and I've got my dream trip to some remote island that doesn't have COVID, can you approve this? Well, the board could still say you have to wait 45 days and that's not an emergency, and we can still take 30 days to approve that.
Okay. And then, so I know we went over this before. Some of my questions are spanning a little bit how the hybrid model is going to work. So if we have to postpone some of these questions, it's okay. But, and you did answer a little bit of it when you said the class size would be smaller in person, so therefore remote would have to be larger. That was one of my questions. But I guess I wonder, like, I'm just thinking about the remote teaching slots. So one, will any families are voting on, like, do they want remote, do they want in person? Will any families be assigned remote or in person if they didn't ask for that, or no?
No, so the school principals are going to be sending information out through the weekend to identify, to contact families to say this is it. And now this is the time to make a decision. Here's additional information to weigh your choice. We need to know. We need to assign you to groups. And then the schools will work with their personnel in their buildings, if necessary, to develop like a phone bank to reach back out to people. where our intention is not to move any students in or out of settings without that determination from the family. I think the default's in-person instruction if we don't hear from someone we're not going to put someone in default remote instruction if we don't hear from them. The default would be to in-person instruction, because the transition from in-person to remote is easier than the transition from remote to in-person, just from a numbers perspective.
Okay. And so that leads to my next question, which is, in this hybrid model, let's pretend that somebody used to have 25 kids in their class, or I don't think any of the classes are that big, but you had said something like Monday, Tuesday, the cohort would come in, work with, Miss Susan, Wednesday's cleaning, and then does Miss Susan like remote teach them on Thursday, Friday, or she has a new cohort of in-person students, because we know that, there's more in-person students.
So the schools, depending upon the schools, are working to develop those models around that, and that model has some degree of variability, and they'll hammer through those pieces. I'll say that the goal in some of the schools is to use like what we call a phased entry in. The ultimate goal is to have students and staff in the buildings 4 days a week. In some cases that may happen sooner or staff in the building 4 days a week, that may happen sooner than later, but the ultimate goal is to phase that process in. And so if that's the case, for instance, it wouldn't be unusual to see a teacher with a cohort of students in person for 2 days, and then they're working with those students remotely for 3 days in kind of smaller pods, if we can make that happen. And again, the part of the process is to have this phased transition back into the building, where we have that degree of flexibility, and we're providing the principals the flexibility within a set of parameters to make it work.
Okay. So it sounds like, we don't know yet because we'll have to see what the staffing requirements are, but there could be situations where kids have more than one teacher. And there could be situations where kids have one teacher consistently for the in-school / remote learning.
The goal is to have the teachers be with at least one adult consistently to the greatest extent possible and when feasible. And a lot of it, the numbers, the student requests are really the driving factor in all of this. So the student numbers will determine how many remote environments we have to set up, and then what the in-person classroom environments will look like. And so that's the big key point in all of this, is to kind of finalize that detail.
Okay, that's my questions for now. Thank you.
Great. Those were
Easy ones today.
Those were easy, Emily.
Yeah. Somebody else I gave the hard ones today.
Okay.
Maybe Liz.
We'll find out, because Liz is next.
Oh, Liz asks hard questions too.
It's more a comment than anything else, but families don't know what remote instruction will look like this year, and they are basically assuming it will look like what it did in the spring, and that isn't accurate, and that information has not been widely I lost my word.
Yeah.
But that hasn't been communicated out to families. They're thinking, if it looks in the spring, forget it, my kid's going to school. And that bothers me tremendously.
Yep.
And that needs to be made crystal clear when you are sending out, you need to make a choice. You need to give them what it will look like, how many hours for each grade, because it's completely different than the spring.
Yeah, it is. And I'll say, I'm going to cut you off, Liz, because you do ask just as hard as questions as Emily does.
That wasn't hard.
Oh, I know it wasn't hard. I will say I was impressed. Our elementary principals yesterday worked for several hours on finalizing. So a lot of the work started collaboratively at Green Street School, as well as other schools that have been doing the work around what does remote learning look like, as well as our continuity of learning team. They have a kind of a nice side-by-side comparison in many of the schools that can be shared with families around what are some of the distinct differences between them. I think that the work, especially to see the elementary principals yesterday working so hard on something to kind of come down to what does this language look like and how can we work together as a team to make things look great? I think there was a universal agreement that even amongst the principal groups that, you know what, remote learning will look differently in the fall for us than it did in the spring. You know, in the spring it was, oh my gosh, we're going to turn on a dime, our hair's on fire, and we got to fix this. And now there's been plenty of time, and you put time and plenty of smart people in a room together, and they come out with a great product in the end.
So that information will be sent out to parents with the choice.
Yes.
Okay, because it keeps getting dropped from some school newsletters, and I find it annoying. But, okay, thank you, Andy.
Yeah, sure.
Kelly Young is next, Carrie.
Go for it, Kelly.
So I don't know if these are more comment than, or just kind of bringing up a point that you may need to think about. But I was wondering if, of course, all this goes based on how the parents and the students sort of respond. But have you thought about maybe, this may work more so in the elementary schools, combining classes like a second and third grade. I mean, if there aren't enough kids, combining classes that may be based, I mean, if there are a lot of people who don't want their kids to be in the school and they want them to be doing remote, that may be a creative way to sort of help lessen the, you know, the need for two teachers for many kind of classes, if that indeed happens. And the other thing is more a concern, which is, what will you do if there are, let's say there are 8 science teachers, I'm thinking more of the high school, middle school, there are 8 science teachers and they all need some sort of accommodation or something, so there's not enough science teachers. I'm wondering if you're thinking creatively about other teachers who may have some abilities that they can kind of come and fill in at least for a portion of the time for those classes.
Yeah, I know that both the middle school and the high school have been thinking, well, I can say one for the smaller, your first point, and combining groups and combining cohorts of students. That's a topic that's been brought up by the elementary principals, and to identify, especially in the smaller schools, where there's that capacity to do so, to have some multi-graded rooms if necessary. A lot of it will be to fit what's the best match in their buildings, and what meets the need. So that it's a great idea, because it did come up. And the idea with the design in those spaces, once we have the numbers, is for people to be as flexible as possible. In regards to certifications within teachers, we are, you know, we've got to let the numbers drive it, but we've thought about what would that look like for teachers if they have to do science remotely or English remotely, and how can we staff that, and what available staff do we have to supervise kids that would be doing an in-person class remotely. That is, if they were taking a science class with the teacher, that they had to be remote, what does it look like if that person's in the building? And that gets down to those, oh my gosh, we have to do this and we have to be strategic about this, because we know we're gonna have difficulty finding people. I think part of that came through, if you saw Vermont Digger today, the superintendent up in Mill River decided to start the year off fully remote, and a lot of that was driven by his fear about the inability to staff the schools. And I'm hoping that we're going to have enough safety precautions, that we've developed. The health and safety team has been really pretty thorough in their planning. The different school sites have been thorough in their planning, that won't be an issue. But I will say that things are, as we're trying to be as creative as possible to solve those problems. So if it comes up to something like that, we'll look at what does that appear to be, and then how do we staff and supervise those spaces if that's the case.
Tim Maceo is next.
To follow up on Michelle's question, I imagine you have a plan for temporary classroom assignment permissions to allow teachers who don't have complete certification to fill in for certified teachers.
So we're starting the substitute process now. We would look at those items for that. We haven't worked directly with any local universities yet on that, but that's something that we can have our HR director check into as well. But that's a good idea, Tim.
But could pairs, for example, without certification, be permitted to fill in for, if there's a teaching shortage?
I would say that they could substitute if they meet the requirements for the role. We would, if there's a shortage, we would post and see if we can post for something, and then look at what we can do to provide substitutes. And then if we can't provide substitutes externally, we would look at how can we cover those spaces internally, especially at the upper grades. If it's subject or content specific, it gets a little difficult.
And last question.
Yes.
Can we be proactive and offer pairs and people who don't have full certification some training in online teaching so they can fill in perhaps?
Yeah, we can work on that, absolutely. The pairs are provided a number of days beforehand. A lot of this hinges also on the end of what the count on the student year is. In the legislature, if the legislature waives certain requirements of the number of days, we might get some more flexibility with staff in the building, but I can talk with Frank also to see if we can offer some level of differentiated training for our paraprofessionals as well, to see if we can add to their, if we can bring them in during the back to school days. And if that would get covered under the CFR, the CARES money, or anything else of that sort.
I don't see any other board members. I would like to ask one more question. Carrie, you might want to open it up to the public if you'd like. But Andy, when you mentioned the principals are coming up with the plans and the assignments and all that, are they going to be, when I think about our 500 employees and how so much of this is controlled by statute and contract, but are they going to be kind of meeting personally and telling people what the work is like? And if somebody, I mean, our staff, are people going to be able to talk to the principals about what actually is going to be on? Is there going to be a personal conversations and reassurances with all these people? So they've got a real solid basis of making decisions, and also so they can ask, I mean, they can ask questions right now, but
I'll say that I've been incredibly impressed of the amount of meetings that our principals have held with their faculties this summer, David. You know, I'm on all the emails for all the schools, and the number of staff meetings that the principals are holding, and then with that, the number of staff that are attending all the meetings that want to hear more and want to know more. It really speaks highly of the commitment of everyone in there. So I would imagine it would be similar. You know, whether they hold them in person in a socially distanced or physically distanced setting or not, I'm not sure if they have plans to do that before the set date to return to the buildings. But the principals have been holding frequent and regular faculty meetings with their staff and kind of having gatherings and get-togethers over the summer. I mean, it really is incredible, especially at all the schools, the amount of time people are putting in to make sure that we have a great reopening and that everyone feels supported.
yeah, I didn't, when I said personal, I didn't mean like physically personal.
Oh, yeah,
but, you know, in one-on-one conversation. Yeah, when talking about people's livelihood, it's obviously pretty important to be really thorough. Liz would like to ask some more tough questions.
One thing that disturbs me a lot about this return to work thing is that where they list underlying medical conditions. Well, if a staff member, let's say their child care is the grandparents, and the grandparents are in their late 70s, that would be a risk. And then that teacher would not have child care, which you can get unemployment for that if you don't have child care. I know we just looked into that one. But I have a lot of concern that, you know, people, their families, you're kind of asking, there's probably quite a few teachers, I'm guessing, that have a family member who is at high risk. And, you know, making them use all these leaves, I mean, that's great that you have them, but I think that we need to acknowledge that there's probably quite a few who they have to weigh, am I going to go into the school while I have a high risk family member? And the other thing is forgetting what county it is, Michelle knows, in Mass is now developing into a hotspot that is not too far from here. And I was reading on the news today, they expect Boston soon to become a hotspot again. So those are all concerns that I guess we'll all have to consider whether we declare a COVID emergency. But I just wanted to raise that because, I think that could be a real problem for our teachers. I think this stinks.
I agree completely. I mean, these are among the many things that keep me up at night. When I wake up and it's 1 or 2 or 3, it seems like on the hour lately that I'm waking up and we're thinking about these things. These are the things that weigh on all of us. And how are we working with our faculty, knowing that we also have to staff our schools accordingly for our students and our families that need and depend upon the schools. And it's a hard piece. The piece where I'm asking to look at the contract language is really a step above what the law requires, and that's the part that weighs most heavily on us, is that we have to look at how far above the standard of the law can we go, because the law really says if you don't have a qualifying condition that would meet these accommodations to do something, we're not obligated to provide anything to you. What we want to consider is if you have a qualifying condition, if you have a condition that isn't qualifying under X, Y, and Z, can we still consider that in some finite capacity an emergency leave? And that would allow that person to take the year or a duration of time to kind of sort it out. And so while it's not an easy fix for anyone, and especially if it's a financial hardship on a family or for another reason, that the difference in this leave versus other things is the leave protects the employee's job. And the leave protects the employee's job when and if there's a vaccine available for everyone within that range, that job could still be available for them, versus nothing else. And it's like the 1800s all over again, where someone gets sick or something happens and you lose your job and now you're out of luck. And it's bad decision or even worse decision. I would completely agree. And I hear you, because these are the things I wake up and I think, oh my gosh, now what? And what do I have to write down now to figure out what we can talk about next?
Emily Murphy-Core and Ann Beekman are waiting.
So Andy, 2 follow-up questions. One, I guess I wonder, so you had said that if a family did not respond to the survey, that the student would be placed in in-person learning because understandably it's easier to go from in-person to remote. I guess my question is that may be easier to go from in-person to remote, and maybe it's an equity issue, because part of me thinks it might be if we put people initially in remote and we can't accommodate them in in-person, but it does strike me that there may be more teachers who want to work remotely than students who want to study remotely. So I guess I wonder, what are your thoughts about if you don't respond, you're in a remote cohort? Because it's kind of like we gave first preference to those who responded by a certain date. And then, also it could be more of the preference of the teacher that's respected and responded to.
I hadn't thought about it in that regard. I would say the trends we're seeing kind of mirror what are nationwide trends. I think that most of the surveys that we conducted and the surveys that the WSEA conducted all indicate a preference of teachers to be remote versus in person. And I think that's a trend that's also being demonstrated nationally. We really hadn't thought about what does it mean to develop put kids in remote classes first, because there was a desire to have some flexibility for families. If a family had a situation where if a child was remote and said, hey, both parents, found employment and the child needs to be in school, or we're comfortable now with school, can we, and these underlying health conditions fixed, and they really need to be in the home setting, I mean, in the school setting and not at home. We wanted to make sure that we provided small enough groups to place children into. If we create too many remote spots for people, we don't have the inherent flexibility to have some of that movement back and forth from one environment to the next. Like, we could create a situation where there's no family wants to go back remote, and then the space needs of the environment don't allow it. And that kind of 6-foot guideline, you know, when feasible, when possible, is we're gonna follow that as closely as we can. But that those kind of physical distancing parameters kind of will factor into some of this and our ability to have some of that movement. And I think that was part of our original thinking about that movability, that flexibility, and that permeability from one boundary to the next.
Okay. I mean, I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, just to be honest, like, I mean, if people don't respond and people want remote options, I mean, I want to protect the community. I want to protect the teachers, as you do. And I understand that parents might, you know, eventually need, if they are going back to work, but if I'm just fearful of it, and this is fear-based, so it's not really going from a data-based perspective, but like, if there are people who need to work remotely for medical reasons, there's not remote slots, and then they have to do the unpaid, or so they have to do the leave of absence. It just seems like there could have been another solution to like the people who were placed in person for kind of because they just didn't indicate. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
But I don't know that situation will come up. Like, maybe actually we'll have enough remote slots and it'll kind of move along just like the scenario we're talking about. But I guess we won't know until the numbers come in, but I would like an exploration of, if the numbers come in and there's a certain amount of families, you know, we see the teacher request and there's a certain amount of families who, you know, haven't responded, and the requests that are medical, you know, they would be approved. We might have to reconsider.
Yeah.
The second question I had, let me just think if I remember it. Maybe Anne can go and then I can ask my second one because I forgot it for a second. Anne, can you take over for me?
Sure, thanks. I think. Obviously, it would seem to me that COVID should be declared an emergency. Now, I have another question. Suppose our hair does catch fire. Everywhere in the country where they have opened schools thus far, they have seen outbreaks. So if we have to turn on a dime and go fully remote again, how will all of these leave requests accommodate changing our situation that quickly?
You know what, it depends upon the situation and what happens. I think if a person, kind of under the law, if a person takes a full year leave of absence or an extended leave of absence, that person can't come back under that, because we would conceptually have staffed that position if a person was granted a year leave of absence. So we would have to, so if someone's out, we have to do something for that FT, that full-time equivalency. And so there would need to be a staff in place. And so that staff that person would still need to remain on leave. The schools are building their models, you know, flexibly enough so that if we do have to go back into fully remote, you know, the professional development and learning time is present, where teachers continue to develop their skill set around that. And then the groups should be able to transition smoothly from one setting to the next. The people on leave are kind of pulled out of that pool of who's moving in because that leave was granted for kind of a fixed amount of time.
Okay, thank you.
I think Emily is ready with that last question.
Okay, my other question was, I know at a previous meeting, many teachers and community members brought this up, and we've had some side conversations around this. Is there anything you can share with us about tents or outdoor learning opportunities that involve, you know, more free-flowing air, as we, and maybe assumption of some of the fields that surround the schools for these free-flowing air classrooms, at least for September, October, like while there's some nice weather?
So the schools have been looking at their outdoor classroom space. I know that each school has its own a take on outdoor learning. Guilford has its, kind of copious amounts of outdoor classroom spaces. Putney has a lot of land around the schools that they'll be using. I know that BAMS and the high school have been looking at additional kind of tent space for outside. Oak Grove has built an outdoor classroom. We'd encourage the principals to look at other tent spaces, but I know that's been first and foremost on their minds about how are we getting kids outdoors for one, both experiential outdoor-based education, but also using those outdoor classroom spaces.
So it wouldn't be the case though that like there would be tents set up and 10 students would be essentially at desks or some kind of things in an outdoor setting?
There may be in some settings. Steve and Nancy and I were on a phone call the other day and we talked about, some of the tents and, so as the classrooms, as we look at social distancing or in the classrooms, the tents will also serve as an area for some of those desks to go if they're outside.
Okay. And would we be hearing about that, kind of as a classroom assignments come out? Is that when we would know a little bit more about like the space allocations for outside?
Yeah, we'll probably have more in a couple of weeks when we do the meeting at probably the 19th. Is that our next?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Michelle,
questions?
oh, go ahead.
Oh, no. To you, any questions from the board?
Michelle Green had her hand up and now it's gone. I'm not sure if she has another comment.
I'm here.
Yeah, okay.
Andy, I don't want to put you on the spot exactly, but I'm just curious if based on the conversations you're having and seeing some of these initial surveys between staff and our community, if you're seeing, like an alignment between the needs and requests that are, when you're looking at this data, that, you know what I mean? Like, is there a balance that you're kind of seeing? Or are you seeing that, staffing, are we worried that staffing is going to be an issue, that there's many more staff who need accommodations than families that are wanting to be in school or things like that?
I think it's, I'm seeing kind of an inverse in relationships, between there's more of a family demand for in-person learning than there is a comfort level to teach in person. And so it's more kind of I think if we polled our faculty, I think 75% said, hey, I'm not comfortable right now and I'm concerned about this. And I see that, or I'm somewhat uncomfortable, I'm a little uncomfortable, I'm really uncomfortable. If you took those or I'm totally comfortable, the 75% is kind of, mostly I'm a little uncomfortable. And it's not as much like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I'm completely uncomfortable with it. But there is a population that feels that way, and we have to recognize that and figure out what can we do to make the buildings as safe as possible, and remind everyone that we're focusing upon relationships and creating culture in the building first and foremost. But I think that mirrors nationwide trends. I think that. There's a lot of angst about going back into the buildings within schools, and we're fortunate that the numbers in Vermont are where they are. When we hear the health information that the numbers are still really low, despite surges in other parts of the country, that we still feel we're pretty safe right now. Where everything is from week to week, though, is always is our best guess, and we're planning to reopen, but we saw just a few weeks ago that the start date of school got pushed back. So I think the state's trying to be as responsive as possible to things, but when the state's trying to be as responsive to things, it doesn't really help allay fears as well. So I think it's important that we all operate with the assumption that there are some people that have a degree of discomfort, and we've got to be as flexible in our work as possible with them.
Okay. So we've talked about people coming back into the schools. My perspective is the other way around. I'm wondering if people see what cohorts look like and they say, you know what, this doesn't work for me. Or they do a few weeks into school and they realize this is not healthy for my child. They can't cooperate in a not traumatic way. so complicated, but does that, I mean, how much flexibility would we have to be rearranging in real time if we find, I mean, and can parents even do that? Can they shift? Can we accommodate that for families and, you know, have some flexibility with our staffing to be able to allow people to shift out of in-person to fully remote?
It's easier to go to in-person to fully remote than it is to go the other way, knowing that the cohort still may be a little larger. If we would probably want to hunker down with the principals and continue to evaluate it, you know, week by week within the first couple of weeks, and then kind of every other week to see where are we with things before we make any level of determination about how much ability we have to shift things around. We're kind of using an unknown target for numbers right now. We have kind of guesstimates based upon some initial surveys we've done. And then looking at national trends, but we would want to just continue to evaluate that on a building by building basis and look at what we can do.
Okay.
I think that the important takeaway though is that what we start with is not going to be carved in stone because we want to be responsive to staff and student and family needs.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Other questions, David, from people?
Yeah, there are questions from the public, from people who have been very patiently waiting through the
Thank you,
process of
public.
hearing from the board. Tara Castine and then Trish Coyne.
Okay.
Tara Castine Putney, thanks for having this meeting today and discussing this. I was wondering if any of your committees for safety or back to school learning could actually are including teachers on those committees or parents on those committees as part of that discussion on what the needs are.
So the committees have included teachers when and where possible to contribute to that. I anticipate holding, once we have the full kind of draft document of things, having some parent forums to get continued feedback probably about the middle of the month, once we can compile things. So we saw our health and safety group was able to compile their and create the health and safety guidance document, which blended multiple documents together into one to give the parameters for what does school look like from a health and safety perspective. We want to kind of simplify that for families so that we're not including it's an 8-page document or a 6-page document. We want to kind of simplify that so that it's not so overwhelming. And then so that's kind of an example of some of the work that needs to be done now to pull things together. Once we have that, once we have something, we'll probably hold some family forums for feedback for kind of tweaking and adjustments. Understanding that we have until, you know, we have a September 8th start of school date to finalize different things. We want to train staff on those items first, but we do have, you know, we do have time to continue to work with the clock on our side.
Trish Coyne and then Stacy Fraser.
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to, first of all, just say thank you to Andy and the board and all the principals and everyone who's been taking on this monumental task. I wanted to just put a plug in for a trauma-informed piece around kind of the base of what we're doing when we're developing curriculum and talking about going back to school. Maybe that's a piece that we can address in our in-service. Because I think that, you know, I know that as adults, we are traumatized. And I know that our children are traumatized, whether we are kind of looking at it that way right now or not. And I'm afraid that if we don't remember kind of that that's at the core of what's happening here, that, you know, levels where we are taught our young them in the way that they're developmentally, you know, that's most developmentally appropriate for them. I think that we really need to pay attention to kind of taking a trauma-informed approach to to this kind of learning at this critical time. So I just wanted to throw a plug out for that. And thanks for everything everyone is doing.
Thank you, Trish. No, you're absolutely correct. And I think that the conversations we've had about the opening of school really has to be completely focused upon community building and relationships. And then how are we helping students and staff reacclimate to the building when we have all of this stuff swirling around us? And everyone has been affected, from the student to the classroom teacher to the building administrator to central office. And that sense of normalcy was kind of really wrested away from us at a time where, you know, we're still processing this, and students are still processing what happened, and adults are still processing what happened. And, you know, teachers, while we had some level of contact with kids in the spring, a lot of the critical milestones that we would like to see were taken away, and we have to process that. The administrators went from having kind of joyful interactions with staff and students to being in constant problem-solving mode and having to kind of unweigh that baggage. With other transitions thrown into the mix. And so I think you hit a good point of really making sure that when we go into school, understanding that students are going to come into us with different states of mind, and we have to make sure that we're learning to respond and not just react, and create safe learning spaces for everyone. And so I think that will be part of the back to school work that each of the buildings are doing in terms of how we're framing the learning for the year.
Stacy Fraser and then Molly Stoner.
Hi, Andy. Thanks to you and everyone in admin. I know how hard this has been and that there's no easy answers to any of it and a lot more questions. I guess I just had a comment thinking about, while I understand that you need a template and that the ADA provides that template around how people can, you know, get accommodations, I feel like this virus, what we know about it, shows us that those are really finite categories for something that is really showing us that those categories do not really speak to all the people we are hearing about and reading about who are getting seriously ill and or having long-term health effects. And I guess my concern as an educator is there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect between this idea that, you know, I might get plexiglass to help protect me. This isn't just discomfort. This is like, I actually feel this is a really unsafe thing. And I don't say that lightly. This is not just a typical year of, I just feel like I need the carpet removed from my room because I have allergies. It's really scary. And I just wanted to put that out there from both a parent and educator that this feels really scary and we've never dealt with something like this. And so I'm hoping that we can have, you know, some compassion and understanding for families and educators and staff who really don't feel comfortable being in the classrooms, but might not fit in those categories.
I agree. You know, we are, you know, in some cases where I completely agree with you, and I'm married to an educator, and I see the stress and my wife's face. I see the stress in her friend's face and what they share and talk about. You know, I have my own set of stresses about what does this all look like. I think that everyone feels that. We're bound by the law in many cases, and what we can do and what we can best accommodate under the law and still be able to provide an environment for kids to come into the school. And it's a really difficult balancing act. You know, and it's taking one tough decision and weighing it against another really tough decision. But I completely understand, and I do feel the sense of anxiety and urgency that everyone has around this. Those are the 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock morning, like, oh my gosh, okay, let's breathe deeply. We can make through this and we can make it work. And if we can figure out a way to best make it happen, when I share like the plexiglass, you know, an example for something, it's just to highlight, you know, what kind of accommodations are available under, you know, that we can have at our disposal. It's not to say that this is going to solve anything. It's just, this may be a recommendation. And that's why we encourage people to work with their healthcare practitioners if they do feel at risk, so that they have that. And it's also, in some cases, I was asked by someone, well, if I have X, Y, or Z, do I need to talk to the doctor? And we said, we should always have a conversation with your healthcare practitioner if you have a concern about your health. don't listen to a person that was an anthropology major as their undergrad to tell you what to do. For your personal health and wellness, talk to your physician, but it also provides people a level of protection under the law that we have to provide and we want to provide to people. It's not the best answer. I'm sorry. I wish we had, and I'm being totally transparent. I wish we had better answers. This is a really, really difficult time for everyone, and we understand the discomfort that everyone has. And I think as we get closer and closer to the start of school, that we have to remember that anxiety level is going to ramp up too, because we're getting closer to this time where we don't know what it's going to look like, and we have to make sure that we as educators and as administrators or as teachers, we're approaching it and treating everyone the same way, and understanding that the conversations we have will be kind of guided by that, and to take that all into understanding how we work with people.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Molly Stoner and Ellen Tumovicus is next.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Andy.
Hey, Molly.
This is my page of questions. And some of them say U, they're about my union hat. Some say T, that's my teacher hat. Some say P, and that's my parent hat. So do you want to pick which category you want first?
I think you ask harder questions than Emily.
Well, I was debating whether to sock it to you with the hardest one based on what
go ahead, Molly. Give me the hardest one. We'll start with the hardest one.
I'm going to give you the hardest one because it flows right off Stacy. I was going to save it for last, but I guess one of my questions is there a point at which there would be so much, there would be so many people asking for remote, or there would be such a high level of anxiety that we would consider changing the plan we're in to a remote plan?
Is there a point? I mean, there's always listen, the only thing I'm married to in life is my wife. And there is always a point at which we have to evaluate where are we with things. We have to keep in mind right now the prevailing, when we were on with the secretary earlier today, the numbers in Vermont, so at the different stages of reentry, stage 1 was that kind of emergency remote, and stage 2 is where we're entering. The data in Vermont right now is really indicative of that we could be entering at stage 3, which is really the least amount of physical distancing required for things right now. And so part of, so we have to, one, look at the overall North American and primarily the United States landscape in terms of what's happening, because, it seems like Canada's figured out how to stop COVID from erupting in their country. But we have to look at we have to look at what's the overall landscape in the country, but we have to look more specifically at our region and what's going on here and how safe are things. And I think we're kind of seeing the news nationwide because it's everywhere. And that's, I think, driving a lot of the concerns that we have around things, in the anxiety that we all have with what's going on, and in terms of what's safe and what's not safe. But I think at some point we would all look at, and I wish I had a crystal ball to tell us what that number is. Because we have to examine what's our capacity to offer. We don't have the capacity to offer an unlimited number of leave of absence requests.
Right.
If we did that, we wouldn't be able to have a safe school community if we did so.
Well, and so some of the nitty gritties that kind of led me to that final question are things like, you were talking about the lottery and the first level and then the second level of the lottery. And I guess one of the things I was wondering about is, what happens when those two levels of lottery happen? Those spaces are all filled up, and then there's still this large group of teachers. I'm just projecting right now, but say there's a large group of teachers that still wanted remote, some of whom have ADA categories and some of whom don't. One question is, aren't we bound by the legality of the ADA for the ones that have ADA categories? And then another question that I had was, if they've asked to go remote and then it's the 17th of August and then they find out that they can't go remote, is it too late to then apply for leaves? Because I definitely have had this is Union Hat, a lot of people contacting me saying, what do I do if I don't get remote? I can't be in school. So what do I tell those people if they don't win the lottery?
So one, under the ADA, you are, if you have an accommodation, I believe my sense is, and I don't want to butcher this and speak for for someone that is better of an expert at it. If you don't have the accommodation, you don't have to grant it if it's not something that you can actually grant. So you can't we can't add staff to a building. We can't add positions to a building just to accommodate something. I think in some buildings there are spaces where there's not a demand to do so. And that's some kind of other conversations that we can have offline around what are some ideas around making some of those things work that would require some really collaborative efforts. Keeping in mind the goal is to keep the buildings open. So really the ADA requires that you provide an accommodation if you have it available, but if you don't, this is what led to the question for the board to consider tonight is what do you do with those individuals? Your second question of what do you do with someone that doesn't have a qualifying event? Well, under the law and under the dictates of how we want to treat people are two different things.
I get that, yes.
So under the law, the school district's really not obligated to provide anything other than whatever those leave requests would have to be, but for the full year, really not obligated to provide anything. I don't think any of us could really be comfortable in being in that spot in many situations, provided it doesn't, hamstring the district from us being able to operate effectively and being able to provide a safe space for students and for all staff involved. And so these are the tricky questions where we have to really make sure that we have the numbers that are dictating everything for us.
I agree with you within the plan that's been presented, but what I guess my other really hard question is, it's not necessarily a question, it's an observation, is that I think there are plans that might accommodate better. And I know a number of teachers have said that, have sort of been hashing out different ideas. And I wonder if we're boxed into a plan that isn't ultimately allowing us as much flexibility as some other plans might. So I'm just putting that out there, that I know we're at August 6th.
Yeah.
It's not a great time to consider changing the whole entire plan,
Well,
but like you said, what are we married to? And I'm open-minded, so my mind is still open.
Molly, I just want to remind you there are 9 people waiting to speak.
Yeah.
So if you could kind of be concise with the rest of the questions, thanks.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think I've kind of done most of them. The only one was a parent hat was, you mentioned the elementary schools being, having the program outlined, and I'm wondering if there's going to be more clarity about the plan at the high school prior to parents making decisions.
I'll talk to Steve as well about that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
That's it.
Ellen Tumavikas and then Chelsea Wheel.
Hi, everybody. Sorry about the mute issue. I just wanted to, there's been a lot of talk about anxiety, and I just wanted to point out, I think we all know what it's like to have free-form anxiety, that we're just feeling anxious for no reason, and that's probably not very helpful in our lives. And there's also anxiety that's very instructive and that can help us make decisions for our well-being. And there's anxiety that has a reason, right? How we learn to not touch the burning stove. But my question relates to that because, Andy, in the beginning of your really thorough presentation, you talked about the fact that we're entering a safe work environment when we return to school. And that because of the unquestionable safety of the situation, we will be expected to teach in the building unless we personally have health factors that contraindicate a successful COVID acquisition. But I think this thinking, if you think it through, I think it seems to indicate that there actually is a reasonable possibility that the likelihood of contracting the virus in this work environment is indeed present, which doesn't really feel safe, since COVID is an equal opportunity virus with inconsistent intensity and fatality rates. And then on top of that, the fact that there won't be ongoing testing, the assertion that the numbers are low at this point is a little bit of a crapshoot. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to this disconnect and how you came about that statement, how you can help us understand that statement that we are indeed entering a safe environment and mandated to return to that.
I would say we're creating as safe an environment as we can and mitigating the issues of the virus as we can. I think that, you know, we're all balancing and mitigating the challenges of the virus as greatly as we possibly can. That's the, you know, would we receive, and I think this is where the health and safety team looks at how do we protect the perimeter? What hygiene habits are we putting into place? What cleaning habits and practices are we putting into place? What physical distancing guidelines are we following? How are we responding to reacting information from the Department of Health? We have to get information from someplace to help us make decisions, and that's where we come from on that. You know, with that, we're trying to create is both a physically and emotionally safe environment for our students and our staff. We have to understand we can't create a space that's, you know, like a correctional facility where people are marched wherever they go and they're locked into one different space for long periods of time. We have to make sure that we're creating a space that's physically safe and emotionally safe for our students. Would we say that we're any place is 100% COVID free? I don't think anyone, with the exception of maybe one person in this country, would probably say that right now. And we would just want to be really cognizant of that in our planning, which is why we'll continue to evaluate where things are. Where we are in September will most likely be different than where we are in October or November as information becomes available to us.
So do you think it's a safe environment? I'm not sure I completely understand your.
Do I think we're creating as safe an environment as we possibly can? And I think safe, it would be disingenuous for me to define safe because everyone, you know, safe is everyone else's perspective, and their perspective is their reality. So I would say we're creating as safe an environment as we physically can by enacting whatever the safety precautions are that we've received from our health and safety team, our COVID coordinators, the Department of Health, our school nurses, and making sure that we have all those items put into place.
Okay, thanks. I guess inherent in that, the answer that it's, you know, and I get it. I can't even imagine being in your position, but the fact that it's safe as possible indicates that it really isn't safe given where we're at as a country and a world. And if that consideration would be taken into the remote requests.
Julie, was that a question or is that a rhetorical statement?
I don't know. What do you think? I think it was.
I think there's probably 7 or 8 other people, and we've been on the phone.
I think it was actually a question though, and that would be my last question. Yeah.
We're trying to make things as safe as we possibly can for our students and families and staff. And really, you know, I think that we all are operating up here right now in terms of our level of concern and worry about what the world happens to be. I think some of that comes to us. There's the realities of the world in our area, and then there's the realities of the world, you know, of the health concerns in this country. And I think some are overlapping and some are distinctly different. And we have to continue to operate with the best advice from local healthcare practitioners that tell us what's going on. If numbers spike and if we receive directives to say, hey, you've got to dial this back and you can't have people in, then we're going to respond to that. If we receive information that says, hey, you can have everyone in because we've eradicated the virus, then we're going to go that route as well. But we respond as closely as we can, and we let the science guide our decisions and try to get the best science possible to help guide our decisions.
Chelsea Wheel and then Michelle Green.
Hi, thank you so much. So I have a question as a teacher, but also as a parent of a school-age child. And just wondering where, for those of us who may need to take a leave of absence strictly for childcare, if our children are in school in a different way than teachers are in school, where that leave of absence would fall in that, that like up to 45 days or 5-day answer from the board.
It depends how many days you would need, Chelsea, to be out. I think that there are other categories that may meet that need prior to having to use like an unpaid leave, depending upon how many days it happen to be.
Right.
And so we would want to sit with you would want to sit with the HR director and let to see what are the concerns and conditions about that. And then we would want to figure that out from there.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking that for some of us with school-age children, this is the most extreme way that we would figure out childcare. And I know that everybody's working really hard to avoid that. But if it is 30, I'm sorry, I can't remember if it was 30 or 45 days, that really puts requesting a leave like now. And that feels a little premature given that we don't have a ton of information about what a return to school looks like. And I don't want to miss my opportunity. If I have to make a choice between my job and my children, it's really not a choice at all. And I would hate to take a leave of any kind. So I don't want to leave anybody in limbo, but I also want to make sure that I can take care of my family. So I'm just wondering where that would fall in the days I would need ahead of time.
Chelsea, I'm not sure if you came in, you may have come in late, but that was the first part of the meeting dealt with that, and the actual business of the meeting tonight after we've finished the conversations is a series of motions to change all of those, to make all of those deadlines flexible so that we can accommodate people, so that staff understand what their assignment is. They have a full education on the safety efforts and the precautions that are being taken before they're asked to make those decisions. And that's August 17th. So I'm not sure if you saw all that, but that's exactly what we're here tonight to do.
I understand that time frame. I don't understand where taking a leave because you need childcare, I don't understand if that is under that emergency leave kind of category, or if it is our usual request for leave category, which wouldn't be a shortened timeline, correct?
Yeah, so I would say you would want to probably reach out to the HR director to walk through those questions next week.
Okay.
To see what those things are, and she can provide you with more direct feedback on that. And we're going to announce her name Monday to the district.
Wonderful. Yeah, I had reached out previously, but without it, that's tricky. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes.
Michelle Green and then Liz Adams.
Yeah, I just want to touch a little bit on what Molly was just talking about, and just in consideration of still being open to amending our reopening plans. I know that Vermont is safe, and that's great, but we are a district that borders another state, and I know that 45 minutes south of us, Hadley School District just was the first of a large region. It's got to go in front of a bunch of boards, but they were the first to approve a fully remote option. I was going to forward it to everybody because it's interesting. That looks like introducing hybrid in November, and the plan goes all the way until next March and bringing all the students back in. So I hope that there's just room, still sitting there. But I also I guess I just really want to encourage communication and transparency with the public in regards to our teachers' needs. Obviously there's a lot of homes that don't have flexibility, but I think that there is a lot of our community that does, and that, doesn't want to see our teachers backed up against a wall and put in a position where they have to choose their livelihood over, it feels a little bit like bullying them into being in the schools if that's not something they feel comfortable with. And, as a parent in the district, if I were to hear that, our numbers don't match, and this is our staffing needs, and this is where we stand, it would make me pause and reconsider if I should be sending my kids to school, or if I could work with my kids and do a fully remote option, if that meant accommodating my teachers' needs and making them the priority. So I just really encourage that you trust your community and are transparent about what our teachers need to be supported. And just, even if it just opened up a few more positions to allow our teachers to be supported in that way, I think you might be surprised.
Yeah, Michelle, I don't disagree with you. I think that there are so many competing factors. I've tried to be a consistent advocate for both, for all the employees of the district. I'm learning to be as transparent as possible around certain things. There are certain things for many reasons I don't like to share. Like when we talked last week about the survey for our staff, because I do feel like educators are put in a really, really negative light, because there is a demand that many of our parents have and need to have children in school so that they can find employment or work. And family financial insecurity and housing instability or food insecurity is running headlong into the needs for the people that work with their kids to be safe on a daily basis. And it's really just such an imperfect mess of a situation. But like we said before, we want to be as flexible as possible with this. But I certainly recognize how many, as many families as we have that say we can do fully remote. We have probably many more families that say, I can't do this because this creates too much of a financial hardship for us. And we have to be in work. And that's a really, really difficult reality to try to figure out.
I agree. First of all, I'm a huge Andy fan. Okay.
You've been more than kind.
Big Andy fan here. I think you're doing a great job. And I think you're sincere. And I think you're doing an amazing job for someone who just walked into our district. And I do not take for granted my privilege to be in a position where I maybe could be flexible at all. I understand that there's a huge need and there's many homes that cannot be flexible. I feel that much respect and regard for our educators that if, being transparent with our community and just putting it out there might shift numbers to even accommodate a few more people, that we might be surprised. And I think we need to be open to that, as well as also just being, ultimately looking at our staff comfort level and making sure that people feel safe. And I don't envy what you're doing, what is responsibility at all. Yeah. I understand.
And it puts me in a difficult, it puts me in a spot, an untenable spot, because I can't say that while we can share with families, we encourage you to drive your child to school because it will help reduce those social distancing numbers on the buses and it's a safer way to get your child to school. I have to be kind of neutral in the in-person versus the remote functions around what we're encouraging families to make a decision. But if I'm kind of paraphrasing, if I'm kind of trying to infer in what you're saying, you're suggesting that, a recommendation for families would be to request remote learning as great as possible, is to the greatest extent possible, to limit the number of children in school and create as many remote teacher openings as possible to maintain the sanity and safety of our and the sustainability and retention of our staff.
I mean, it could be the next survey question of first pick, is there any consideration? Absolutely no consideration, just to gauge that flexibility in the homes of our students. Just another piece of information to gather potentially. Yep. Like, would you be able to do this if, I don't know.
Yep. That's a good thing. It's a good thought. I mean, I do appreciate that.
Jess Earp and then Bethany Ranquist.
Hi. I had a couple questions, but I think they're quick. My first one is, if teaching remotely is considered an accommodation, does that mean you can't have a remote teaching position if you don't have a qualifying factor under ADA, even if they're available?
No, it doesn't mean that.
Okay. But
It
you
just
would just be
means
like last picked.
Yeah, it's like, it's got to be the sequence, the tiering of how things are picked. And this came up at a leadership group the other day, and it's because it's been widely, my sense is because it's been widely perceived as an accommodation granted elsewhere for people that can't do something in person under all employment, that's where we would have to go first. But it doesn't preclude us from being able to assign someone that doesn't have an accommodation that remote slot.
Okay. My next one, we're kind of waiting on the governor or the legislature to decide if they will shorten the number of required student attendance days to finalize our calendar, correct?
Yes.
Okay. My next one's probably a little bit of a longer answer. I'm just wondering, I'm a teacher and a parent, how you envision sort of the timeline working where teachers see what their day or week is going to look like versus when parents need to make a decision. It kind of seems like a circle, like we really need the numbers from parents to make decisions about teacher day. But if you're a teacher, you may need to know what your day/week looks like before you can make a decision for your kids. So just if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would imagine we would start seeing some things fall into shape by middle of next week.
Okay.
No, some of our principals reached out to staff to help with kind of follow-up phone banks, to reach out to families that they don't respond to surveys, like, can we get them on the phone and kind of figure out them, and let's do a push, the beginning of next week to get those numbers nailed down so we can figure everything out.
Okay. And my last question, I think, might be more of a question for the board. But I was just wondering if the board would consider approving job sharing options, especially for teachers with like childcare needs. So for example, if there was like 2 third-grade teachers who had kids, and one had kids going Monday, Tuesday, and another had kids going Thursday, Friday, and the teachers were in agreement if job sharing things are still on the table or if we've passed the deadline for that.
I'll respond, at least personally. I can't speak for the whole board, but I have a feeling that as we get closer and have the information Andy was just talking about, that we're going to have to do a lot of adjusting. That there'll be people who've got 2 kids in school one day and 1 in another school another day. Just impossible to do childcare, or kids of different ages. Just all those kinds of things are going to require accommodations, and sharing a teaching position might be really the smartest way to approach it. Andy said a bunch of times that the only thing he's married to is his wife, and I think that's true of all of us. We're really open to what's going to work and what's going to make the most sense and what's going to keep people safe. And I'm pretty sure I'm pretty confident that the rest of the board feels the same way. Andy, unless you see, I don't see an obstacle to that at all.
No, I think that we're going to get, Jess, I think we're going to get to middle of August, and we're going to be throwing as many ideas as we can at the, and trying to figure, how do we address the issues around staffing. We'll have a much better picture. Hopefully we'll have a sense about student days in the year, which will, we have to come out with, we're going to have to fix the calendar at some point and then adjust accordingly. Because right now it's starting the 8th, which, I've got to move a couple other days around so we can find more professional development time for teachers before we start. So I think, in the next week, we're going to be really kind of throwing out a lot of ideas around how we can all work together to staff things, and really enlisting the school leadership with the union within central office to kind of tackle some of the more vexing issues around how do we staff the classes.
Okay, and this is just a comment. I'm on some like parent Facebook groups in the areas, and there's been a lot of, talk about possibly doing homeschooling, and just, I don't know if that comes from building principals or the board or from you, Andy, but to be really clear, the difference between homeschooling and remote learning through the school and what that does for our funding. I'm a little concerned about that, and this is a couple weeks ago, so more information may have gone, but I was talking to a friend that was like, I want to homeschool. I don't know where to get materials. And I was like, well, you could do remote schooling through the school and then they'll give you the materials. And she was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I'm looking for.
Yep, exactly. That's a great question. I think homeschool and remote learning were used interchangeably in the spring, and everyone got this sense of like, oh, I'm homeschooling my child. Like, no, your child's teacher is working till 11:30 at night to work with your child. You're supervising. Your child's teacher is still working, and they're working their behind off to do this. I think we've got to clarify that homeschooling is removing the child from the school. You're on your own. It's got to be approved by the agency of education. There's got to be a plan on file with the district office so that we know where the kids are, but there are no services provided to that homeschool child. Remote learning is a fully public education student, and they're part of our enrollment. And I think that's a great point. We'll make sure that, I'll make a note to make sure we clarify that too. Like, as we're thinking about these things, terms mean a lot, and words have significant consequences on our funding sources as well.
Megan Altschuler and then Tara Castine.
Hi guys, thanks. There's a lot of planning and that needs to happen at the administrative level. After each building receives all of the student data that you were talking about like who's making what choice, but without knowing which staff who have very specific skill sets are going to be available both in person and remotely, that planning becomes pretty difficult. So I was at the beginning of the meeting, but part of it was a little choppy for me just with my service. And so my understanding is the date to apply for leave is the 17th of August. Is that also the date that you're applying for remote teaching as well, correct?
So the remote teaching piece, so we have to reserve remote teaching slots first and foremost to people that need a remote teaching accommodation. Any sort of leave requests or any sort of conditions or challenges or things that might require a person to need some level of accommodation should go through the Human Resources Office, and we'll send some information out in the coming days about that.
About how to apply to teach remotely.
Well, it would be for an accommodation. It wouldn't be necessarily to apply. So the steps that would have to be followed before school principals would look at, hey, I've got to identify, I need a remote teacher. Who amongst my staff can I move into that spot? They would have to go through a couple other different steps first, like people that need an ADAA requirement, accommodation. This is the Americans with Disabilities Act amended. Next to people that have a non-qualifying need for an accommodation. So for instance, could be a family member at home that's immunocompromised that they can't risk, kind of bringing the virus back into the house. All those things, and then, or there's someone else and then there's a different position within the district that wouldn't fit that level of accommodation as well. So, somehow the principal figured out I can take my 23 teachers and fit them into these positions, and we've crafted this out, but somehow we've created this other spot, and it's remote. That could go to someone else that needs an accommodation from the ADA list from a different building if the certifications match up, and then it would go to the building level for the building principals to identify.
So there's not necessarily an application process to apply for a remote teaching slot?
We would get to that. We would get to that aspect of how are the principals soliciting people to do that, and they would have to use a fair set of criteria across the buildings to identify who are the people best and most qualified to do that if it gets to that level.
Okay. And is there a specific date by which staff who need to work remotely will be informed if they do not qualify for the ADA accommodation?
Yeah, so the principals will have to, figure out how many people do they need within their given set of teachers per their building, per kind of certification area. So elementary is a little easier than secondary because of the content specificity within like a math or a science or an English teacher. And it would be by those at those levels. So they would look at, what do I need out of my 25 teachers? I know that I'm going to have to create 2 remote sections based upon student demand. Now I have to figure out within this population, how do I do this? So it's driven by student need, and those numbers will be generated. HR director will look at the list by the 17th in terms of what's come in and kind of build that list, and then start the matching process, and then notify people within a day or two if sorry, there's not a space for you, let's talk about next steps and how can we accommodate you in person, or is there something, or do we have to look at other options? I mean, really the idea is that how can we accommodate you and what can we develop for you for accommodations within reason to help make you work and help allow you to function and be able to work in school.
Okay. And so it sounds like maybe contacting HR to figure out what to do about wanting to work remotely, as well as making anyone's needs met at the building level.
Yeah,
Or,
that really,
understood.
yeah, it's the HR director will be heavily involved in all of this.
Okay. And then this is sort of a side note. Will there be district level policies about handling situations in which students refuse to follow safety protocols, or will this be building specific? Hand washing, mask wearing, distancing, etc. I'm imagining this specifically. I imagine that this looks really different at a middle or high school level than it does working with pre-K and through.
Yeah. So we would encourage families, if they know that they have children that have difficulty with wearing a mask, or if they have difficulties complying with those reasonable requests to wear a mask in the interest of public safety, that they select remote learning. And we would encourage families to do so. And we have to look at what are the kind of the typical practices, because we have 7 elementaries and then 1 middle and 1 high school, and different programs. It will be kind of different along each way. But they, so there's like kind of categories of ages and stages in terms of how we address it.
Who is encouraging those families? I know you said it would put you in a difficult position to be sort of reaching out to people and saying like, hey,
well, I can clarify that. So I can't really advocate one position over the other, although I do feel comfortable saying we encourage families, those that have difficulties with complying with mask wearing for whatever reason.
Yeah.
You don't have to say it's for any reason at all.
Sure.
I do not feel uncomfortable saying, please select, you might want to consider remote learning given the challenges your child may face this school year. These are going to be, compliance with it's going to be expected. We'll do it in a developmentally appropriate way and with working with students and creating, the social stories around how we care for each other. And this is an act of caring for each other. But we know that if students may have difficulty doing that, their best option may be to remain in remote learning.
Thank you.
Tara Castine and then Liz Adams.
Thanks again. I have 2 questions, one from myself and one from Jamie, who had to leave the meeting early due to another meeting she had to attend. Her question was, in regards to children being asymptomatic. The word is not coming. There you go. And the news in Vermont of 30, 40-year-olds dying of strokes from the virus. I know you've said that you're leaving the outdoor portion of the classes up to the individual schools, but have you considered full outdoor options for parents who don't want their kids in buildings?
No, because the classroom is still the kind of the core piece of the connected part. We will have kids out to the greatest extent possible. And while Herb once said to me, Herb Pelletier said to me, believes in the Finnish model of weather, there's no such thing as bad weather, there's only bad clothing. We do have to remember that, we want to kind of ease our students into doing this level of outdoor work. And so an entirely remote, outdoor classroom is really, where they're outdoors all day long is really not going to be entirely realistic for kids 100% of the time.
There are a lot of programs in Vermont, and I don't remember the name, but I can get the text of community and groups who are looking and are willing to help with that thought process. Has the school outreach to any of those programs to learn more about what outdoor education actually
Yeah,
is?
our principals and many of the different schools have been, you know, incredibly active in doing work around outdoor education. I know that Guilford has been heavily involved in the work.
I'm asking if the district has,
As the
because this
district,
seems like a district directive that would be beneficial to both the students and the teachers who are uncomfortable with coming back into the classroom environment.
I can talk with our curriculum director, curriculum and assessment coordinators regarding that, and we'll get, again, day 30. This is, I can say it's day 36 in the job now, although it seems maybe it's a little, maybe it's day 37. We can continue to talk around that.
Okay,
So
great. I look
definitively.
forward to hearing more about that, because I think there's a lot of, in my pod of parents that I talk to, a lot of people who would be very interested in the outdoor only options, and you might have some teachers that are interested in that as well. And I agree with her that, you know, clothing is fixable if that's the only thing holding us back from being outside. And the other question I had was my own, writing off of Michelle's questions and concerns. I do agree that if we as parents know or have a feeling of what the teachers want in this situation, there would definitely be a base of parents that might say, yeah, I don't really want to do remote learning, but it's an option if it fits the needs of what our educators are asking for. And also, I believe in most of our towns, there is a flexibility of having pods outside of the school environment, which would offer childcare or placements of students that need options or places to go during the school day. And has that been, thought about as an option for our schools?
In terms of working with, I'm not following your question entirely, Tara, in terms of creating outside pods.
Yeah, so instead of it going full remote, which it's been voiced that the issue with going full remote is that there are some students that for whatever reason need to be in school. There are parents that are not working that maybe could take on a child for that time and create homeschool pods, which would then be remote learning together.
No, we haven't looked into that. We've had a degree we have to focus on a very finite mission in front of us. And so, you know, we've got to there's so much with things that the bandwidth only goes so wide. So we can kind of keep things kind of focused on that, on the critical factors in front of us.
And the critical factors are, again?
Reopening schools safely with everyone. I mean, when we get to little things, we've got to make sure we maintain the bandwidth on the vast majority of things.
Okay. David, how many more people have hands raised?
Well, they keep coming. 5. We have
David,
5 more.
I think because we've covered most of the things in previous meetings, we have a couple more. I may have to pause to get a drink of water in a second too.
Well, why don't we take a 5-minute recess? Or Karen,
I'll just turn my microphone off. Why don't we keep it going? I turn the microphone off in the interest so we can get to the if the board wants to make a motion on those bigger questions.
Well, I guess that would be one question right now is, do we want to at least entertain motion number 1, which I can't imagine is going to be controversial. And that is that, and I guess we have to do this 3 times. So we get each of the boards to do it. And I guess, Andy, we might need your help on how we're wording this. I don't know if I'm just going to throw some wording out. Am I the clerk? I feel like I am clerking for Walter. Well, we're going to make this work. All right. That the fill-in-the-blank school board determines that, or is stating that the COVID-19 pandemic, for purposes of our contractual agreement, is an emergency. Is it something like that?
Yeah,
I
does
think that's-
COVID-19 constitute an emergency?
So the motion would be, each board recognizes that COVID does represent an emergency. I think that's all.
Does represent, okay. See, okay, so are people ready to entertain that question? Okay, I'm seeing some heads shaking, so that is good. So I, Carrie Amadon, move that the Vernon Town School Board state that COVID-19 does represent an emergency. Do I have a second from someone on my board? Is that you, Hannah?
Yep, that's me. I'm here and I'm here to second that motion.
All right, thank you, Hannah. Is there any question on our Vernon board motion? If not, would people mind if we did a roll call on this one? Just so when you've got like 100 people online, it might be a little bit better if we did that. So I vote yes. Anna, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Carrie Sparks, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Thank you. And Chad Mulverhill, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
All right, so we have, our motion has been passed. David, you want to do your board?
Do you want to do the SU first?
Oh, we can do the SU, okay. I, Carrie Amadon, move that the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union Board state that COVID-19 does represent an emergency. Do I have a second?
I second it.
All right, I'm giving that one to Michelle. All right, so I vote yes. Michelle, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Ann Beekman, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Kelly Young, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
And David Scholes, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Okay, so now the SU board is done.
Okay, so for this WSESD board, I move that we recognize that the COVID does represent an emergency. Can I have a second?
I second, Liz.
Thank you, Liz. Any discussion? Well, I can, if you would all unmute, I can see you on the screen and I can tell that you are there. And then I can ask you to answer. I can't see, but your microphone shows up.
Ah.
So I believe we have everybody. I don't see Kelly yet. Oh yeah, there's Kelly. Sorry. So, and Emily. So all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, we're done
If only it were that easy, David.
with the first motion. Yeah.
Do we want to move on to the second one? Do we want to try to get 2 of these done?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that makes good
Okay.
sense.
So, Andy, help me with this one. I think what we're trying to say is for, is this just for, tell me how legalese we want to go on this. I know it's section 28.7 where we are in effect saying that we're not going to hold people to the 45 days prior. What's the best wording of this?
Will we, because this is the approve it within.
That we will, our board, in effect, our boards will approve these within 5 days,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the motion.
Okay. So
Are we waiving the 45 days?
So the 45-day period was waived with declaring COVID an emergency.
That's
kind
it.
of
That's
passed
it.
broadly. So now we're out of the 45-day window. Now we have to look at, can you do this? The 30-day turnaround still exists, but we need like 5 days to be able to function as a district. So would the board support approving requests within 5 days?
All right. So the Vernon Town School Board, I don't know, do we want to say pledges to, is it approve, deny, or is it just approve?
Move, we will, well, I guess.
Review and
Review and determine. Yeah.
Determine.
All right. Review and determine all leave requests within 5 days.
Of receipt, yeah.
All right. All board members be on notice. There's going to be a lot of meetings coming up. All right.
You
So
don't only need a quorum, though.
that's true. Okay. So I, Carrie Amadon, move that the Vernon Town School Board will review and determine all leave requests within 5 days of receipt. Do I have a second?
Carrie, this is Chad. I'd like to second that, please.
Thank you, Chad. All right. Any questions on this one?
Is it appropriate for somebody not from the Vernon board to ask a question?
It's public
I
meeting.
would say yes, if it's Emily.
Okay, so I guess my question to you is maybe it's a nightmare, but I just imagine all of these requests coming in and then being like, okay, like Monday meeting, Tuesday meeting. I mean, like it could be crazy. We don't know. So is it the case where it could be like, I don't know, they're coordinated on Friday and we respond on a certain day or something?
That's what I would like to do, something like that. And I think that is going to come down to working with Andy and HR around, can we batch these?
Okay, perfect.
And you know, can we hopefully just have one meeting a week where we get them all in and deal with them? So.
Okay, perfect.
We're going to have to figure this out. All right. So Vernon board, I vote yes. Chad, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
All right. Carrie Sparks.
I vote yes.
And Hannah.
I vote yes.
All right. And Walter, you are gone, right? I do believe Walter is gone. Okay. All right. Now on to the SU. I, Carrie Amadon, move that the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union Board will review and determine all leave requests within 5 days of receipt. Is there a second from an SU board member?
Second, this is Ann.
All right, Ann, I'm going to give it to you this time. You got in there quick.
I just like to keep things moving.
All right, Ann, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
All right, I vote yes. I need Michelle Green. How do you vote?
I vote yes.
Kelly Young, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
And David Scholes.
I vote yes.
Okay. David, over to you.
Yep, and I move that the WSESD board, what's the word, commits?
I just said will review and determine.
Will review and determine leave requests within 5 days of receipt.
Second, Liz.
Thank you, Liz. Would board on mute again? I think we're there. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, 2 down. Thank you.
All right. Do we want to see if there's a few more questions? So let me just also, we've got 2 more points of business. So one is, I believe that the board will work with the central office. And then we're looking to, and Andy, can you explain that one more? My notes are bad.
So that question is, I don't know if that necessarily needs to be a motion as much as kind of a working set of parameters that we want to make sure that when we're looking at leave of absence requests, that they're done within a way that allows us to still function and create a safe space for everyone with enough employees in place. So I don't know if that needs to be a motion. It's more of kind of an operational set of parameters when we meet.
Yeah. I would agree. I'm not sure that's a motion. I think that's our job and that's
Yeah.
your job and that's our job in making sure you're doing your job,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yep. So that was more of kind of a, kind of just a conversation point. And then the last question is really around entertaining that I would have discussions with the unions about an MOU that would allow us to look at, reducing that 5-day to 3-day window just, for doctor's notes, just for COVID symptoms. And that's because of the impetus around contact tracing and DOH type of things. And we would define that set of symptoms very narrowly to just COVID things. So other items that might have someone out for 5 days wouldn't require that for 4 days, for instance, wouldn't require a doctor's note, just for things that are COVID related.
All right, so we're talking about authorizing the superintendent to work with the union to create a memorandum of understanding on sick day.
A reduction in the requirement of days absent necessitating a note from a health practitioner.
Days absent necessitating a note from a healthcare practitioner.
I think that we need a qualifier like provided those symptoms, something to the effect of provided those symptoms match those of the COVID-19 virus.
Those of COVID-19. Okay. That
Yeah.
sounds good. All right, so I, Carrie Amadon, so Vernon School Board, we're up again. I move that we authorize the superintendent to work with the union to create a memorandum of understanding on a reduction in the requirement of days absent necessary, to necessitate a note from a healthcare practitioner, provided the symptoms match those of the COVID-19 virus. Do I have a second from a Vernon town member?
This is Hannah. I'll second.
Hey, Hannah. All right, we have a motion. We have a second. All right, I vote yes. Hannah, how do you vote?
It's me, sorry. I'm toggling between mute and unmute. I vote yes.
Carrie Sparks?
I vote yes.
And Chad Mulverhill?
Chad votes yes.
Okay, on to the SU. I, Carrie Amadon, move that the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union authorizes the superintendent to work with the union to create a memorandum of understanding on a reduction in the requirement of days absent to necessitate a note from a healthcare practitioner, provided the symptoms match those of COVID-19. Do we have a second from the SU?
Second, this is Ann.
Thank you, Ann. Any questions on that?
I have a comment.
All right. Oh, comment, all right. Comments allowed.
I don't know if anybody realizes that pretty much every symptom, everything you could have is a COVID symptom. That's coming from a home of a medical provider. Everything is COVID related. You're going to get a test.
Well, I think we're just trying to make sure that this isn't,
I was just laughing.
I stubbed my toe and.
You can go in for a well check and like have a red toe and they're like, COVID test. So I'm just like, that's okay. I vote yes.
All right, we've got one vote. I vote yes. Ann Beefin, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Kelly Young, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
David Scholes?
I vote yes.
All right. David, over to you.
Now, I move that the WSESD board, Carrie, would you please recite the
Authorizes the superintendent to work with the union to create a memorandum of understanding on a reduction in the requirement of days absent to necessitate a note from a healthcare professional, provided the symptoms match those of the COVID-19 virus.
Have a second, please.
Second.
Seconded.
Thanks, Michelle. Too late, Tim. Let's again unmute, please. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 7. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the business is conducted. Thank you.
So I know Vernon is meeting again next Monday. You guys are off until the 19th, VSD?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Unless, right, yeah, I believe so, unless something comes up.
Okay.
We do have 5 more people. 3 of them are board members, and then there are 2 who have not spoken yet and have been waiting for a really long time.
Okay. Andy's got a glass of water, so he's good for another 2 hours.
Okay, I'm gonna, the public, Lorraine Bramble and then Bethany Randquist.
Hi, Lorraine Bramble. I'm actually a teacher at Green Street. I have a comment and I also have a question. I'm having those teacher dreams before you return to work of all the scenarios that could happen. And the one that I keep coming back to is if you're teaching in person, most likely you're going to be, I'm an elementary teacher, so most likely you're going to be working in a team. If that team is working with a certain group of children, everybody in that team is going to be exposed at the same time. So, you know, if those teachers have to just quarantine for 14 days and do the kids also, and then what happens? Does everybody go remote, the whole class of kids and all the teachers? And
it depends upon the exposure. We would work with the Department of Health on those guidelines. You know, an exposure to COVID-19, you know, and I've seen it anywhere from buildings are closed from 24 to 36 hours to, it depends upon working with the Department of Health on the information. And the reason for the small groups is for that level of contact tracing and exposure. I would imagine if there's, in the event, let's kind of play it out to the ultimate conclusion of there's a, you know, the need for a quarantine, we would look at who has to quarantine. Is it a classroom by classroom basis? Is it a site by site basis? Is it a building by building basis? And make that determination from there. Certainly if there's a quarantining issue that's related in Vernon, might not necessarily mean, or if there's an exposure event in Vernon, it may not mean that Putney, for instance, has to go into all quarantine, but it might be certain spaces within those buildings. The flexibility we want to work with and make sure that we're working with our human resources department is that kind of that emergency paid sick leave. We don't want people to draw upon that if we can have people work remotely with their classes instead. So we try to save some of that for, you know, if someone did get sick and it was, you know, related to another thing. So we want to look at how flexible we can be with those things. So if there is a quarantine situation, we would expect that, okay, here's a directive to quarantine. We're now going to go remote with this, whatever the cluster happens to be, and whatever the size has to be.
okay. The other question I have is I've looked over all the leaves that are possible depending on the scenario. And if you're a teacher and you don't have a lot of your own personal sick time to use, and you have to fall into the ADA or the Family Leave Act, it all seems like it's short term, really. I'm thinking, you know, in most of the scenarios we've talked about are either just having to quarantine or being mildly affected by COVID. What if a teacher is hospitalized and is severely affected by COVID? It looks like, and they don't have a lot of sick time, it looks like they would have to go to a limited amount of pay eventually. And I just see that as a, you know, a hardship for a lot of families. Is there any protection in the district for people that would fall into that situation, that they would be able to receive their full pay?
I would talk to Human Resources about the role of disability and where disability falls into that. I'll be honest and totally transparent that, you know, Carrie, did we decide we're 36 or 37 days in, Carrie, into the district about understanding the total role with where disability, you know, coverage falls into that, and if that's a protection for people within their role. So I would check with HR about that piece, because they can find an answer and do a far more adequate job than I can in providing it.
Okay.
It is with this, but these are, you're bringing up, like, these are the vexing issues that come with this, and why we're spending so much time talking about these things, and why we're being so ponderous in our movements and thoughts and planning.
And I understand that. And I just have a quick comment for everybody, but I've only been in Brattleboro teaching for about 15 years. I worked 24 years in another district, and I am so impressed by this school board, all of the school boards, and just having this ability to be online, because I do live an hour away, so I don't often stay for board meetings unless it pertains to my school. But I'm just so impressed with the level of people being compassionate, listening. I know that all of your decisions are so hard, and Andy, you coming in at this time, but I just want to show my appreciation for everybody. I am highly impressed, and I just want to thank you all. That's all I have.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you. Emily?
So I wanted to make two motions. I'm not 100% sure how to make them in this kind of format, but I guess I'll make them for the WSESD, and then if it passes, maybe other boards have to do something. I'm not sure. So the first one is, I move that the board and administration encourage families to choose remote learning in all outreach and communication.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Liz. Discussion. Oh yeah, I do have to do this, don't I, Carrie? Sorry.
Yeah, you have to do this. Now, am I your clerk right now?
The video is my clerk.
Okay.
Thomas might be writing it all down, but.
Okay.
I'm writing down motions. That's it.
Oh,
And
perfect.
attendees.
Thank you.
Emily, can you repeat that?
Yep. I move that the board and administration encourage families to choose remote learning in all outreach and communication.
Any questions, conversations, comments?
David?
From the board? Yes, Kelly.
So my comment really kind of goes to this, and what I'm hopeful is that when the principals send out their information asking the parents and the students which they would prefer, which choice they're making, I'm real hopeful that the description of what a remote learning environment would look like is very clear in how it differs from the spring. So as a parent, I know that it was a crisis. It was, everyone is throwing at the situation what they had to, and it was on short notice, and we got through it. But hopefully, having had that experience and having had this part of the summer to kind of reflect on that and to maybe make some plans about how to go about doing it in at least, however it is that we have to do it and for however many students we have to do it, but that we're doing it in a way that works better for students and better for teachers and better for families. So I'm real hopeful that that is really highlighted for families, so that they don't feel like, oh, I had a challenge in the spring and it doesn't sound like I can do that again, so that they can understand how it is different. And then if they are indeed able to do a remote learning, they may choose that as opposed to sending their kid to the school, and I'm hopeful that that may alleviate some of the concerns of the teachers, and so maybe we would have more kids choosing remote if it's clear as to what parents and families would be expected to experience.
Thank you, Kelly. I would would add to that and maybe, well, I don't want to add to the motion or to the workload of the administration, but I wonder if we might, since we've had dozens of teachers working over the summer in teams and individually, but mostly in teams, creating remote or adjusting to make more and taking courses as well. The music teachers have done some astonishing work and coursework on teaching remotely to prepare for this. I wonder if we might ask the administration to identify or to ask for volunteers for maybe 3 or 4 teachers to do a Zoom demonstration and invite parents to tune in to see just what it's going to look like, how at different grade levels maybe or different subject areas, and just put that out. I don't want to add that to the principals, but it might be done with a simple email and a response through, well, we could even volunteer to coordinate that if necessary, but to get that information out. I don't know if Michelle wants to talk. Michelle had mentioned in another meeting about, I think it was Michelle, a lot of parents who are expecting that it's going to be like March, and they're looking to existing online school systems, school businesses, basically, or platforms, and are signing up for that rather than for school. So that's something we can try to promote as well, along if we pass this motion. I see Liz and Ann have their hands up. Liz has been up for a while. Is it to address the motion, Liz?
Well, it was for 2 different things, so, but,
I'll do just the motion this time, please.
yeah. So, yeah, and in the communication with families, at least from what Andy has said to me, the amount of hours online varies from grade to grade. So if we can be really specific in that kind of stuff when we send out the information that Emily has requested, I think that would help families a lot and make so it would be really clear. You know, your first grader isn't going to be online for 5 hours a day. You know, that type of stuff.
Thanks, Liz. Ann.
Well, I absolutely think that it's a very good idea to encourage families to use the remote option as often as possible. That doesn't necessarily address the needs of the high school students. The last best information we have from the principal is that the online course offerings will be limited. And particularly in the case of seniors, they don't need a lot of core classes. They need electives, that sort of thing. So it's really almost not an option for seniors unless the course catalog at the high school can be expanded. And it might not be the best one for other high school students who don't necessarily need 10th grade English. They need 10th grade honors English or 10th grade remedial English or something like that. So I'm not sure that's an option at the high school level, really, if you think about it. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ann. Thomas.
Yeah, so Ann just brought up a point that I had totally forgotten that I wanted to bring up earlier. Is I wanted to clarify, is it true that the high school is not offering fully remote learning? That was my reading of it, and that was surprising. No?
No, they're still offer fully remote learning with in person.
So what is the difference then? What does that mean? So if you take a fully remote course load, you're not getting any of the electives? Is that what the case is? I don't understand the difference.
You don't come into the building is really the big difference, and it's more for and I would defer to. I'm not sure if Steve is in.
He just raised his hand.
Oh,
He's
Steve,
here.
Steve, you can share. I didn't see you on my list.
Sure. So what we're looking at the high school, I guess I want to address Ann's concern as well. So what we're doing at the high school is we're actually taking a look at what students have chosen remote learning. And then we're pulling those kids' schedules and we're seeing to accommodate those students who have chosen remote learning, what courses do we need to look at to make remote? Which courses do we need to not make remote? So we're really trying to build a schedule still based on student choice, whether it's remote or not remote. And I hope that addresses Ann's question. You know, we haven't said that we're not offering certain courses. What we're doing is we're looking at course requests to do that. And Thomas, I guess the answer is that we are going to offer a full remote option for kids. You know, and what we need to do now that we've had this meeting is now we have a mechanism by which we can identify which teachers will be remote and which students will be remote. And that's going to allow us to kind of dovetail the teacher's content and area of expertise with who has chosen those particular courses. So, you know, we've been reluctant to say a lot until we could have a mechanism to identify remote students and remote teachers, but it sounds like tonight's getting us there. So that's great. Does that answer both questions?
That answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Steve. It answers mine as well.
Yeah, and it's good to have that information out there because the rumor mill has been talking about just the most basic courses are being offered. So that's good to know. Thank you. Julianne, Egan.
Sure, thanks. I just think there's a lot of implications to a motion like this. And I just want to, you know, point out in the community, everything that's been communicated up until this point has been saying basically that families have this choice between a remote option, a fully remote option and a hybrid option. And, you know, even the article in the newspaper this week had that stated as well. And I know many families, I mean, when we think about especially, you know, pre-K, K-3 families, remote instruction it's very different for that age group as opposed to the older grades, and the implications for that are significant. So I just think that people may be really quite surprised by that as a real shift in what we've been planning and working on. And so I just think there might be a little more time needed to consider the implications of that. You know, there is a lot of staffing considerations with that, you know, with that model and thinking about how that will work. We were in a position where the state was emphasizing offering some level of in-person, and the plans that have gone into that so far have been kind of what's been communicated to families. So it's just a big shift in light of what has been communicated, even up until like today, actually. So I just want to put that out there. Up until now, we've been communicating, we have these options, trying to fully inform families of what those options will look like is ongoing, and then having families make a decision based on that.
Thank you. Michelle.
I'm just, because we were talking about the high school, is there a reason we haven't had a superintendent meeting at the high school level? We've done it, I think, with all the other schools. Is there something holding us back from that opportunity for parents to do a question answer forum and meet and greet?
I think that's been more scheduling for Andy and I.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've had a couple of forums on our team nickname, and I know the board meeting schedule has been pretty grueling. So, you know, and each week I've been waiting to see what the board schedule is before I schedule my forums regarding the kernel nickname. And to be honest, Andy and I have not had a chance to coordinate when that would happen because he's kind of busy, and I want to respect that. But you're right, that should happen soon.
It should happen soon. Andy, would you share your 2 cents on this motion? What you feel? I appreciate hearing Julianne's perspective.
Well, I think, you know, we've been discussing the priority, and the priority from the Agency of Education has been to have in-person instruction, and that's been and I do think that you know, the students at the younger grades are the greatest risk of suffering the most in a remote environment. And especially, you know, if we look at where some districts are having this kind of blended environment of, you know, some kids doing fully in person or in person as much as possible and others at remote, that split is really kind of K2, K3, and then upwards where kids can do more independent work. You know, I get worried about some of those critical junctures. We talked about it the other night, you know, that key transition point where students are, you know, they go from learning to read to reading to learn, you know, those kind of critical junctures, second, third grade. And I do get worried about what does this mean for equity across the district? You know, how do we, you know, and I don't have an answer for that because we wouldn't really know to be able to describe it. What does this really mean for equity for all students and families? Certainly it creates a situation where we may have some unintended consequences of what does it look like for those that have to go to school for 4 days a week or for whatever the number of days a week it would have to be. What does that say? Are there unintended consequences of how they're perceived in the community or amongst the community members? I mean, I think those are all deeper conversations around some of the dynamics of education and where we are as a society right now. So I you know, again, I'm trying to be Switzerland in the motion because it's in part has to be my role with it. But I do think that while I see the needs for staff and the needs for people to have an understanding of what does the choice mean and their implications for all our choices, I do think that I get worried about what does a protracted remote learning experience look like for our youngest students in particular. And then how do we address, you know, if that's a worry, then, but we reach that point, what do we need to do to address that worry and fix that concern?
Thanks,
I didn't try to be as wishy-washy as possible, Michelle, I'm sorry.
We have a couple of members of the public that I'd like to call on as well. I just wanted to say, and Kelly too, but I just wanted to say something. When I hear from Andy and Julianne, I immediately start questioning my initial, actually, whenever I hear solid information, I question my initial thinking, which I'm sort of glad that I still do. But this whole process of reopening is very much coming from above. There's pressure coming from the administration and the Agency of Education. This has not come from educators. The pediatricians agree with it. And the fact that the likelihood of an outbreak has more to do with the conditions in the community than anything else, and than how you combine people or how to put people together. If there's not a lot of infection in the community, it's been shown over and over again, there's not a lot of infection in institutions. But having said that, I also know that there have been lots of places like South Korea and others that opened up after having done a really good job and gradually opened up and tried to get the schools going again. And the results were very quickly, they were very quickly had to go back into emergency lockdowns and had lots of infections and had to close again. And were basically set back all the work that they had been doing and all the preparation and all of these hours of meetings that we've been doing. And I think really, it's not I think, because this is really more in the realm of fear, that it really is hubris for us to try to jump in, even with 10 student pods, to try and jump into as much in-person learning as we can, simply because, not simply, we know it's the best thing for most of the kids. There are lots of kids that are thriving remotely, and the better it's done, the more kids there are that way. But I think that we're not looking at starting really small with just the kids that we know, the students that we know really need to be in in-person settings, and seeing how that goes, and getting some practice, and getting some testing out all the safety standards, and testing out the staggered openings and the thermometers, and maybe waiting until having the availability of really good virus testing. You know, all the things, if we were going to do a really slow and careful reopening, we wouldn't do this. And I think that's why I'm going to ultimately support Emily's motion. I think, well, that's enough. Kelly and then Sean and then Bryn Tucker.
So I'm somewhat concerned about the use of the word encourage, because I think although I would love to encourage parents to do what is best for not only themselves but for the teachers, but I'm concerned because I don't want it to appear that the school board or the administration is trying to pressure the families, parents and families, students, into doing anything that is not right for them. There might be some students or some family situations that the kids being in school, physically in school, is really right for them. And I guess I would be concerned about maybe those families feeling pressured to not do that and to choose the remote. I mean, there could be something in those the blurbs that each principal sends out saying that, you know, if it's possible for people, they would encourage them to, but with the understanding that for some families and for some students, that really doesn't meet the needs of the families and the students. I guess I would feel more comfortable if there was, if what goes out to the families includes the little bit about an understanding that though families may want to opt into the remote, the school board, the administration, we understand that that's not going to be right for all families, and we have to present it as we support that. We support that they have to make the decision that's best for their family. So that's my concern with and I don't know, I mean, I'm sure that a different word could be used, or you could look at the word encouraged in many ways, and I don't mean to sound harsh to the motion, but I just I don't want there to be the families to feel any pressure to do what isn't right for them.
Kelly, I'd be willing to amend it slightly. Maybe it could say, I don't know how to change it completely, but I'm open to suggestion. I move that the board administration encourage families to choose remote learning and all outreach and communication when learning remote is also in the best interest of the family.
That sounds great.
So how do I change that? Can I just change that?
Yeah, you just did.
Okay.
Let's see, Sean.
Thank you. I really agree with Kelly. It is ultimately it's the choice of the family and the student which direction they want to go. And saying that the board is making a specific recommendation one way or the other, in some respects, I don't really view it as the board decision. It's the parental and the student decision.
Liz?
I understand where Kelly and Sean are coming from. And I agree to some extent. But if we can't staff classrooms and we're looking at losing teachers because we can't staff in-person classrooms, then we've got an even bigger problem. So for kids who need to be in that school setting, sure, you know, you don't want to be pressuring. I didn't view it as pressuring. I viewed it as encouraging people to select remote learning if possible for their family. But that doesn't mean that we're saying to families who need in school, that we aren't supporting them. So I guess I'm a little unclear about why we'd want to amend it, because I think doing that takes away from what we're trying to achieve, to not lose staff, which it appears we may lose. We encourage families to choose remote learning if it works for their family. And then, that leaves it open without going into a whole lot of anything else. I'm not sure. I know that what David said earlier really weighs on my mind. And I feel that I'm in a moral situation here, several moral situations that I'm uncomfortable being in. So I don't want to encourage people to choose in school when they could very well do remote. We know there are kids that need to be in school. That's a given. But if it's because parents don't want to spend the time with remote, I'm not so sure that's a great answer to anything.
Thank you. Bryn Tucker?
Hi, thanks. Similar to what Lorraine Bramble shared earlier, I just want to echo my appreciation for the thoughtful conversation and discourse around these really, really challenging topics and everyone's communication around them. I wish to share my perspective about this issue as a staff member. I'm an instructional coach at Green Street School, K through 6th grade, and also as a parent of a 2nd and a 5th grader. I totally agree, Andy, with what you're saying about our vulnerable learners, especially our primary learners, K through 2-3 band, and the importance of that academic experience of being in school and having that rich foundation for their future education, 100%. I think I also think about this topic from the perspective of what the social environment looks like, at least initially, for our young learners as we open in phase 2. And I so appreciate all of the safety considerations that everyone is making to make the environment as safe as possible for children and for staff members. But when I think about that for my own 2nd grade son, and I picture what that's like to be in school for 7 hours a day, 6 hours a day, wearing a mask, to not be able to share materials or games with his friends, to not be able to play and touch at recess. I think there's also a social consideration there too. And it's important to keep that in mind, paired with the academic importance of being in school, because it's a super complex and interwoven tapestry of what creates the school experience for our students and for our teachers. And I just don't want folks to lose sight of that. I think teachers are rising to the occasion in every way that they can to make schools successful for kids, whether it's remote or in person. I also know that a lot of teachers are really scratching their heads right now of how do I really create a fun and socially engaging academic environment when my kids are literally sitting in boxes in my classroom, not able to touch, not able to share equipment. And I have to, we're giving assessments where it's instructing teachers to point with materials at the line where children should start reading because we're not supposed to be close to them. So I'm picturing kindergarten and 1st graders who are upset or who need physical touch and comfort. Someone brought that up earlier. So I don't disagree with the academic preference of being in school as we know it, but I also really want folks to weigh as they're considering this decision and considering Emily's motion, also the social aspect of being in school and what the hybrid model really looks like for the amount of time that we're in phase 2, which is hopefully short. So I just wanted to bring that up. And then finally, I wanted to just address your invitation, David, for teachers to come and model potentially what distance learning could look like. I love the idea. I think teachers are so excited to plan for the school year. And that's also very challenging right now when we don't know what we're teaching. And so I would just put that out there too, that I'm sure people would want to come and give ideas. And I know teachers are really excited to start getting ready for the school year. I think there are many of us out there still who have absolutely no idea what we're teaching and how we're putting this thing together. And so I appreciate everyone's efforts to get that information to us as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryn. Kelly Diaz.
Thanks, David. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to weigh in on this motion, and Bryn, as the parent of an incoming first grader, I definitely hear you on the perspective of what the social piece looks like for kids. I've been really impressed with what my own child has adapted to really quickly this summer, going to day camp. They keep their masks on at the park all day, and except for swimming and lunchtime, and she's okay with it. And she said to me, I'll do whatever it takes to go back to school. I just want to see people, see my friends, my teachers. And that was, you know, pretty moving for me to hear. And I believe her, because she doesn't like wearing the mask, but she already understands that she has to do it in order to be in school physically. But as far as the motion goes, to the board members, I just would really want to say that principals have been working really hard to provide 2 robust, engaging options for families. And we've been trying really hard to put out the message that whatever choice you make, it feels like an impossible choice to make, but whatever you do decide on is the right choice for right now for your family. And I'm worried that if we change that message, that's going to feel really bad for a lot of people who really need kids to be in person in school, so that they can attend their jobs. And for a lot of our students, school is the safest place for them to be. They feel the safest while they're there. They're fed, they're happy, they are adaptable. And I think it will really help close the equity gap to have kids and parents choose what's right for them. So in terms of, you know, Emily, you were wondering how might you amend your motion. I would respectfully suggest that you might say something like, the district and the administration will provide clear information about each option so families can make the right choice for them, something like that. But I'd really like to, because we have so much planned and we've put in so much time into trying to really outline the 2 options concretely for families, I'd really like to maintain that level of communication as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle?
My feelings and my emotions are all over the place. Emily, first I'll just say that was really bold and just awesome. Like I was taken aback and didn't see that coming. And I think that was pretty special that's where you were at. And I am hearing, I totally get every single perspective being shared, from, you know, Andy to the principals to Bryn. With my own, the one I'm most concerned about is my incoming first grader. I quit kindergarten in the middle of May because it was so hard of all my kids, high school, middle school, elementary. And, but I'm also very anxious that I want to foster a love of school. And I'm very concerned about, I can't get her to write the alphabet with a mask on. And we've been trying for like 3 weeks. And so I'm very concerned that this experience is not going to be, you know, it's not going to be it's going to be a bit more traumatic. I wish it was a half-day option for her personally, but anyway, that's besides the point. That's the mom thing going on. As for the motion, I don't even know which way I'm going. There's a part of me that really wants to encourage families to be mindful of, you know, of maybe just being flexible. And I think I would, if I felt really it would be much easier for me if I could be really confident that we were going to be really honest and vulnerable with our families and just put it all out on the line. And this is where we're at, and these are what our numbers look like. I know, I understand why we don't want to go right out and share staff surveys and stuff like that. I totally get that, but it would just be a lot easier if I knew and I had confidence that we were going to put this out there, that we did have models in place, like a video module where parents can be oriented to their choices, and really get perspective, not just a conversation, not just a question answer form, but really get perspective on what those choices look like, both remote and in school. You know, this is what it's going to look like. This is what getting to school is going to look like, and being in class, and just that idea of a video module, I think is pretty powerful. Yeah, that's it. I would love to, I'm not sure. I know, Andy, you're doing your best. I'm not picking on you by any means. I just wish I had that confidence that between now and when parents have to make decisions, which is like right around the corner, that we were going to have all those ducks in a row and really empower families to make the best choice. But not just from what's not just from what's the day going to look like, what can you handle, but also from their own emotional perspective of how am I supporting my community, how all hands on deck, you know, what can I contribute? Can I sacrifice? Can I give a little bit more? And maybe you can't, maybe you have to know your own personal limits. So yeah, I don't know how I'm going to vote. Keep talking.
Thank you, Michelle. Ruby McAdoo?
Hi, Ruby McAdoo Putney. I guess I wanted to comment because I feel like particularly the amended motion, I just wanted to flag for you what that, so I'm a parent of 2 kids who are in the younger cohort, and I also don't have a job at this moment, and so have flexibility with being able to care for them at home. But I have seen that the remote option would mean that my kids would not be in the cohort that they have been part of. And for me, even though my kids actually learned well in last year, at the end of last year in remote learning, I would not, it's not in my family's best interest to take my kid out of the existing cohort. So if it was put to me as a parent and as a family member to make that decision, if it's in my kid's best interest, the answer is going to be no. Whereas that's not what I feel like the spirit of your motion is saying. And I think that to that end, I would just wonder if, or think, it's not a question, it's really just a comment, that it might be something to consider prioritizing keeping, if you really do want to encourage people to choose the remote option, consider prioritizing keeping the cohort of children from one class somehow together within the remote world. I understand what Andy's saying, that just the nature of the remote, the planning for remote means that you have a larger groups that you're dealing with remotely, but within those groups, could you pod them within the cohorts from their existing schools so that they have a social emotional remote learning pod? So that's one comment. And then the last thing I say is that I feel like I've heard this from a few board members who mentioned it, but I would just think, I would really love to be asked in a survey, you know, must you be in person? Must you be remote? And are you able to be flexible? And if I was asked that to me is the beginning of, I wouldn't necessarily need to be told, this is how many, you know, we're missing this many teachers and we have holes. Like, I don't need to be told that. I really just need to be asked, can you be flexible in, you know, in choosing remote learning if we find that there's a need. So I just encourage you to consider that when you're putting out your next survey. That's all.
Thanks, Ruby. Maggie Foley.
Hi there, I'm Maggie Foley, Guilford parent. I feel like I'm kind of interloping on a educator-focused meeting, but I'd like to offer a parent perspective on this motion, and I want it to come across with gratitude and sensitivity for all the incredible work that our educators do. I do feel like it has a little bit of an aspect of shaming or guilt for parents. I say this as a parent who did choose the hybrid option, and I did it with a little reluctance because my preference would have been to see a 100% outdoor option mixed with a remote option. I feel like that would be kind of capitalizing on the assets that we have in Vermont and the best for health and safety. But I did do that. I did choose that option. And part of that was a little bit in solidarity with the families around me that I know are more vulnerable. And I do feel like we have this small window of time before flu season. And while our numbers in the community are really solid. You know, I've been watching, I look at the Vermont Department of Health every day at 11 a.m. and we have had no more than 2 cases in the previous 14 days for several weeks now. And our schools will reflect our community transmission rates, and those are really low right now. So I'm not saying I think schools should be open at Thanksgiving or Christmas or in January. But right now, I do think we have this window to put eyes on our kids in our communities that are the most vulnerable. And I think that's really important. And my son, who will be in his last year of Guilford, is really eager to go back to Guilford School. And I am eager to send him there to show my confidence that this is healthy and safe, and to support his peers that are in much more fragile home situations. And I feel like if it's becoming a little bit of those with the privilege of flexibility are pulling their kids out, and those without that are sending them. And I want to send a message that I think this is healthy. I think it's safe. I think we have this small window to come together before probably a really difficult winter. And I admit that. I think it will be a difficult winter. So I encourage you to watch the local science. I do think for someone like me, we can make it work to go fully remote. I was upset with the comment that it was like parents that don't want to spend the time. It's not that I don't want to spend the time. We're a family with 2 self-employed adults. We need to be making money. Sure, we can take a hit and we can make it work. And that's a lucky position to be. But it's not a judgment around whether I want to take the time to remote school my kid. I think it would be best for him to be in school. And I want to go back to the comment of Tara at the beginning of the meeting talking about outdoor education. And I'm disappointed to see that the door is closed on that so quickly. I have a daughter who is 3 years old. She lives here in Guilford with us. She spends all day, every day outside at her preschool. Yes, it's the clothes, the weather, but with proper clothing, it can be done. And we're pivoting in this huge way, and we're pivoting towards masks and hand sanitizers. I don't understand why the pivot can't be towards outdoor clothing, health, and all of that. So my final thing is, I read an opinion article that said, in the country, the schools that shouldn't be opening will, and those that could won't. And I fear that we're in that second category, that we are really in a position, science and health-wise, to be opening, and we're not going to be. And so from a parent perspective, I would find it really upsetting to hear the directive from the school board was to encourage remote learning if at all possible, because the definition of possible is really different for each family. And as someone who is putting a lot of faith in the science, I feel like confident that I can send my kid to school probably for the next 2 months and have it be healthy and support his peers who are in more vulnerable positions. So I just wanted to offer that as my opinion on the motion. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Maggie. And don't apologize, please, for being a parent. That's actually who's supposed to be represented. That's who we're elected to represent here in these conversations. We support everybody, but that's our responsibility is to reflect the values of the community, and that's you. So thank you. P.E. Smith.
That's me, David.
Oh, hi, Paul. Thank you.
If you want to call on community members, that's fine first.
No, go ahead. I'm just going down the line now.
My comment is simply, I just wonder if it would make more sense to wait until we have better data. Any surveys that were done prior to a whole lot of new information coming out. And I think we've got a much clearer picture now that we can communicate, and that's the plan, is to communicate that to parents and to staff. And I think we might be stepping on a step that isn't here. With this motion, I'd like us to, it seems to me it would make sense to wait until we get better data. I'm a data guy. What can I say?
Liz?
Yeah, I wanted to speak to what Bryn had said. As an early educator, I question the value of social emotional learning for the younger students in an alien environment. They are not geared towards, well, let's put it this way. A lot of their social emotional learning takes place within a few feet of their buddies. It doesn't take place spaced 6 feet apart. And I have been wondering, and there's obviously no studies because this hasn't happened before. What are we teaching them? Are we teaching them you may not go close to your friends? You need to keep that mask on, which is totally against their nature and their development and their developmental stage. And that concerns me. It also concerns me that they, where they are in their learning process with academics. But as far, in my eyes, the social emotional piece is just, that isn't really what's going on or what will go on in these classrooms. It's great to say, oh, we're being kind, but that's not how these kids learn their social emotional skills. They learn them in playing with their friends and that doesn't mean 6 feet apart. They're like this far, you know, they're 2 feet apart. And that's where most of their social emotional learning comes from. And so for that piece, I don't believe you're going to get the social emotional learning that you think you're going to get or hope to get within the parameters that keep kids safe. Some kids may be fine with a mask, but that is not how they learn those skills. But yet, on the other hand, I recognize that, you know, they're early in their educational careers. So I don't know where the balance lies there, but I just don't want anybody to think they're going to get a great deal of social emotional learning out of going to school, because it's alien to them and it's not how they learn. So, oh, and by the way, I have been keeping track of Vermont statistics, and it isn't, I lost you. It isn't 1 or 2 a day. It's more than that. And I would be more convinced if the Vermont Department of Health went out and in communities did large samples for COVID, and they're not willing to do that. And that is one of the recommendations, even if you're in a safe area, is that the Department of Health comes and they test like 500, 1,000 people and see if there's COVID out there that's asymptomatic. And our Department of Health is not willing to do that.
Thanks, Liz. Tim?
This has been a really great discussion. At first, when Emily proposed the motion, I thought, sure, that's great. It makes sense. It's the kind of advice that we should be giving. But after listening to people like Maggie Diaz or Maggie Foley and Molly Diaz and others, just to let you know, and Paul Smith, my heart and my head just can't get behind the motion. So if I were to vote now, I would be against the motion.
Thanks, Tim. Sean? I think you're muted, Sean.
Yeah.
You are muted. You're still muted, Sean.
I had to go away because my internet failed, so I may have missed the pertinent part of the discussion. But I kind of like what Paul said, and I was wondering about the timeline in terms of passing this motion or putting it on pause and for more consideration. And then I was kind of going to ask a question. Is the biggest impetus for this motion, is it perceived as the greatest safety net, the safest thing to do? Is that the reason for the motion?
Emily, would you respond? But the motion is interrogated.
So my reason for making the motion was that it does seem, I guess it's twofold. One, it seems the safest. It would phase in students at a slower rate. It also seems that although everybody's suggested that we've been even-handed on how we've presented our options to the community, I don't actually personally feel like that, and I don't know that everybody feels like that. It seems like we, per the Department of Education's recommendation, did move forward with really planning out a ton the options for a hybrid model, which we need to, because that's the most, it's much more dangerous than the remote model. I mean, remotely there are not so many qualms, but hearing from everybody during this meeting and past meetings that people don't know what the remote option will even be like, that suggests that there actually hasn't been communication about that, or that it's been deprioritized in my mind. And we still are kind of like, oh, well, we'll just kind of put out something about it. So I don't know that that really feels that even-handed. Like, a lot of people had suggested when we had that meeting of 200 people, they were saying like, oh, I chose in person because nothing's been released about remote. Like, I don't even know what it's going to be like. And I didn't really care for the spring. And, maybe it's going to be better to be in person. So my intention here was to say, like, I would like to see, you can't put so much stuff in emotion, but we have conversation around it. It doesn't mean that, we can't add things to how we kind of explore this and how we communicate out. But in my mind, I'd love to see something, and this isn't in the motion, just let me say, but I'd love to see something where, at a certain time period it's reconsidered that you can move from remote to an in-person, that it is more phased. We've never talked about how people would go from remote. So if more people, let's say 75% of families at this moment said they would prefer in school, or that was in the last survey, or the hybrid model, I should say. If it goes down to 60% or 50%, and that provides more opportunities for also teachers who may need to work remotely to do that, the hope would be is that maybe in a month or two into school, when we realize, okay, like, we haven't had any, outbreaks, we're kind of doing well, those people could be phased in. We could say, okay, like, who's now interested in this? Like, it just seems like it's all or nothing now, and there's not a real plan to say, like, a date where we're reconsidering and phasing. So without knowing those dates, or without having those conversations and kind of knowing the community sentiments, I think it seems most prudent to encourage people to, maybe, I did a lot of the comments, I've been writing down stuff, the remote learning pods, and considering how people can be flexible. And I really liked the comment from, I don't know her name right now because there were so many people who spoke, but said, like, we don't want to create something where it seems like inequitable, and like stand in solidarity with the people who have to send their kids or are sending their kids because they think that's the best option. They still have the option. Everybody still has the option to send their kids. We're just saying, like, phased may be prudent. And if you can, maybe going remote might be good for the community and your kid. And we can, consider when this phase ends.
Thanks, Emily. Julie Ackerman-Hollis.
Hi. Echoing Lorraine's previous comment, I do appreciate the board so much and Andy's work. And I know this is a really tough time, to say the least. Emily, I so appreciate you trying to make this motion. I'm a teacher at Green Street, and I also have 4 kids in the district, 2 at BAMS and 1 at BUHS. I would love to encourage more families to do online, but frankly, I just don't know what plans we have for it. As a teacher, I haven't heard a lot about how we would change online from the spring. And that doesn't mean that the plans aren't out there being worked on by a committee, but I don't think most of my colleagues know what they are. And I know from having friends who are parents that they don't know what they are. So I think people, not knowing what online would look like and feeling in their gut that it is the second priority of, the school district, that it just feels, even if they're reluctant, like more of a sure shot to go with what they know, which is to send their kids to school for part of the time. And of course, we know that there's lots of families who need to, and that's totally, understandable. I myself have decided to have my 4 kids start remote, which I had to tell them today, and there were tears and it was pretty terrible. And I hated making that decision, but I really don't feel, with the lack of information coming out of the high school and no meeting with the superintendent yet, and the lack of information coming from BAMS, And I don't, and that sounds like a harsh criticism. I love all my colleagues and I love working in this district. I came up from New York 4 years ago and I really treasure working in this district. But the fact is there's so many unknowns right now. For me working in the district, I felt like I don't even know who I'm going to be teaching or who I'm going to be exposed to. I'm a music teacher. I don't know what my situation is going to be. How without any knowledge can I send my kids to bands and BUHS? But I was very reluctant to do the online because I know nothing, really nothing about it. And it really does sound like second best. And I'm personally hoping to send them back to in-person school once we have things more under our belts. But I echo Emily, I don't think that much information is out there about online. And I would love to encourage it to lower the numbers in the schools and give more teachers a chance to do the distance jobs, but I don't know that we have even the information to put out to families to reassure them. And if we do, we should release that to the teachers and the families so that we truly know what we're doing in terms of distance. That will be improved from the spring. Thank you very much. Once again, I appreciate everybody's work, and I know that this is a very complicated situation.
Thank you, Julie. Carrie Amadon?
All right, slightly off topic, just when we get a chance, when we wrap this up, I'd love to be able to let my Vernon people go if we've done our I may not have prepared them for the SD marathons that you guys like to do. So once you guys do a vote on this, if we've done all of our business, I could let them adjourn.
I don't think we have any other business to conduct. Do we formally, Andy, need another motion for anything?
No, and I wanted to dismiss our principals and our school leaders that are here, our district leaders that are here as well. I know that we're going into we're into 3.5 hours thus far. And I know they're invested in the conversation, but I think we're at a point where some of the conversation's getting a little kind of mission creepy from, in terms of what do we need to do to be able to run the schools and fulfill our mission without hamstring us for doing certain things. I mean, so I appreciate the conversation, and I think it's critical, but I think that there are certain domains we're crossing into that may make it difficult for us to, if we throw some of these things out, difficult to administer the rules of the role of the district and in terms of what we're able to do. But I do know that the principals have been working incredibly hard, and I know that their day today started at probably 7:30 or earlier, and it's summertime, and summertime in the life of an administrator usually means days of 8 to 3 and enjoying afternoons and evenings with their kids and families. And so you guys, if you want to take off, I appreciate you staying this long and hanging in, and I really do appreciate the support. But please do depart if that's okay with the board for our leadership group to leave. It's they've been grinding it out all summer, and it's incredibly impressive.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure you were started before 7. So yeah, that's fine. Thomas.
Yeah, so just a second. So this motion to me is very uncontroversial. It's very mild, and I encourage everyone to support it. Let's just go over and I'll be very brief on this because I know we all want to leave, but this is very important. The motion is administration and board will encourage remote learning and all outreach to families when remote learning is in the best interest of the family. I think that's very mild. It leaves it up to the family. And we have to remember we are in a pandemic, okay? Vermont has been lucky so far. But, we've also been shut down longer than most states. And we took a hold of it quickly. School is possibly the most social space in Vermont. It's where the most people come together in one spot. We don't know what this is going to do. Whenever possible, if we can keep people out of schools, whenever it's possible and it's in the student's best interest, I think we have to capitalize on that. I just want people to remember, the reason why we are having any in-person instruction is because there is a risk for students to be at home. There is a risk no matter what we do. When there is less of a risk, it's good to, I think, encourage families to stay home. I don't think this is very controversial, and we might be overthinking it a bit. That's my point of view.
Thank you, Thomas. Eli Gould?
Oops. Yeah, hi guys. Sorry, I'm gonna also try and turn on my camera here. Hey, thanks everybody for doing this and for keeping on for hours here. I actually wanted to just throw a little more update into the general safety factor. I should say, with all due respect, I am very uncomfortable with the motion and the idea that the school administrators are being asked to say we should encourage not doing this. I feel like we need to step back and just, even though it's a challenge, we need to really remind ourselves that this is an essential service to so many families in this district, that I think we need to encourage our staff and actual administrators to do our best to meet this challenge. And our parents, I loved hearing from other parents who feel like it's a solidarity motion to send their kids. That's not only our feeling as parents, but also there's a lot of kids listening to this. There's kids who could probably speak here if they were asked, but this is really important to kids to be at school. And I think we have to take a stance about safety and science to open our schools, and the rest of it, how we actually encourage people, is really, I think we just need to do our best to open the schools. Vermont is in an absolute unique position. I wanted to speak to a kind of a not well understood bit of work going on. I know Frank Rucker is on here somewhere, but Vermont, in contrast to some of the other things we're talking about here, Vermont has actually come out with some really good guidelines on ventilation. And if people don't understand, I mean, outdoor is great, but also there's equipment that can bring fresh air to these children at rates that's equal to or close to outdoors. And we're blessed with fresh outdoor air, and we're blessed with scientific, I mean, we actually have a chance to ventilate these spaces at rates that are making them safer than kids being at home, and safer for teachers too. So, and that work is going on right now. I really want to commend Frank and all the teams who are rolling out. It's short, but these are going to be safer spaces than many people at home realize, or that many people at home are in, actually. So I just want to say, let's stick with the safety idea. Let's stick with the opening idea. And if we have time and effort to spend money on recommendations, let's recommend more things that make the schools more safe and try and get as many people as is safe to be there. But it's not just a number. It actually may be more about how safe those spaces are. So, and I think that kind of speaks to the younger children questions who cannot totally be expected to social distance. It's still safer to have those kids in a place with a lot of fresh air delivery than it is to have them without any of that. So I just want to encourage everybody to keep on going with doing the best we can to open schools. If we have to step back, I trust this is a really honest community who will look at numbers when that time comes. But I think our job as parents, as teachers, and as students who know that their friends really also not just want to be in school, but in many cases need to be in school. I think that's where our energies ought to be. So I would much prefer that we all work on that as public school. We could go to private schools, which are open 5 days a week. We could do things, but we're all here because we believe in what public schools are. And I believe it's a really essential thing that I think we should be 100% focused on how to do it. So And
Thank you, Les.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was inquiring today about the ventilation, and we'll get a report from Frank on the 19th. I encourage you to tune in. I don't know that we have instituted any of the air purifiers, the machines that change the air every 20 minutes or not. I don't know if we're doing that yet, and that would be something to certainly look into. It's not a big expense, but is a big, has great value. So we will be following up on that. Michelle, I'm sorry, Bethany Ronquist.
Hi. Okay. So I've had my hand up for like an hour and a half, I think, to talk about something that is not this motion. So if I can just get kind of bumped
Bethany,
up.
you left a couple of times, so you kept falling to the bottom of the list. Go ahead, please.
It kept clicking off my hand raised, but I still had my hand raised. So anyways, but I'll save that and I'll just raise my hand again to go back to that once the motion passes. I don't think unless I'm a board member, and I don't want to make everybody pissed off at me, but I don't think unless I'm a board member that I can call the question, but I just would maybe encourage a board member at this point to consider calling the question based on how long it is. And I love hearing all the input that people are having. I just also think there's a lot of other information, and I know, just to kind of echo what Andy said, there's a lot of people who have been working all day long, and I don't want to stop any conversation, but it does seem like a basic or relatively minor question to be able to just, if a board member feels so inclined, to call the question and vote so that we can maybe move on to other stuff and other comments or questions that people have while there's still a meeting happening. And I will raise my hand again afterwards so that I can ask my question that's much more general than just this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly Diaz.
Thanks, David. I'm still struggling a little bit with the language of when it's in the best interest of the family, because I agree, Thomas, there's a lot of bigger issues than this, and I think we can move forward pretty fast from this motion, but it really impacts the communications that principals are planning to send out to families as soon as tomorrow to make this change. And, when you say when it's in the best interest of the family, who is judging that? Are we as principals making a determination of which families it's in the best interest for, or are we just putting it out there to the community that if you feel like it's in your best interest, please make this choice? It just is a loaded statement for me. And I think it goes back to that equity piece that Maggie brought up and I spoke to as well. I guess I'm looking for more of an example of how we might change our communication to emphasize this in a way that didn't feel like we were pinpointing certain families.
Thank you. Michelle Green.
I have two thoughts. I'm wondering, well, one, we finally have a communication committee on this board. We really haven't since I came on, and it's myself and two public volunteers, members of our community. And we're about to present our minutes. We have lots of good ideas that we're ready to implement, and I'm wondering if we took out the word administrators, and let this be a board recommendation, knowing that we are finding avenues to make sure that we have much better outreach, if that might alleviate some of the discomfort in this measure. Separate thought also, and I don't know the rules, but if this was kind of set aside for a minute, and maybe we could ask for or wait and get a kind of a deadline and a timeline of where we might better see a plan to inform our families of their options really thoroughly, and we know what that's going to look like, and to empower families just with education.
Thanks, Michelle. Liz.
Yeah. I like hearing from everybody. I think the whole point is that there's been little to no communication about what online learning will look like in the fall, what fully remote looks like. there has been like zilcho coming out about it. And that's what's really raising this issue now. And administrators are not sending out this information. There hasn't been one whiff of it from Putney Central since maybe early July. Fully remote has not even been mentioned. So I think it's critical that in whatever way possible, whether it be through principals being directed to send out a ton more information, because from my understanding, the program's already developed. It's already there. Front page news article in the Reformer, going into much more depth about what this looks like. And so that parents, no matter what, their status is, have an idea of what it looks like. Because a lot of parents are still going off of last spring, and it's constantly all over Facebook. Well, what does it look like? Oh, it's like last spring, forget it. And I think that we owe it to our families to let them know as soon as possible what fully remote looks like for this coming school year. And that way they can have time to think it over and to, consider their family, their child, and have all the information at their disposal, because all they've heard about is everything going on in the schools to make it safe to go to school. That's great, and that's fine. That's what you were directed to do at the beginning of the summer. But there isn't information out there, and it needs to be out there. And I know you've been really busy, Andy. I'm not trying to criticize you. It's just the principals, at least Putney's not doing it. He's all raw. We're gonna, we've done this, we've done that, and that's fine. But there's no mention of remote and what it looks like. And so there's a lot of Putney families sitting there going, well, what is remote gonna look like? Oh, last spring, forget it. So let's just tackle it head on and get the information out there immediately. And then maybe we don't need to do Emily's motion. Just get it out there. And if principals are...
I know, Liz, I don't mean to cut you off. I know the principals are sending communication out to families, and a lot of this is, the model has changed so quickly. Keep in mind, we didn't have an opportunity to talk about remote until July 15th, and then that information kept changing. We have said within different groups and within family forums that remote will look differently, just in terms of there's going to be greater structure, greater alignment with the school day, a greater level, and so part of it is also we're staffing what the staffing looks like, and that staffing has been a little bit flexible, and I think the different grade levels have and different school clusters have gotten to a point where we know what we're doing now. But the principals have been working. They've been sending out whatever information that they have at their disposal, and I don't want to misspeak, but I also don't want to mischaracterize their efforts, because I do know that they're working around the clock. There's just that much to do.
I know that, Andy, but even though you've had the focus groups and you've talked to groups, the wider school community does not know what remote education will look like this fall. And I get the newsletters to my daughter, and it's very apparent that remote option has been planned for in this district. You've got it conquered as far as what you've told me, and to not have anything in last week's 3-page long newsletters to families about remote is disturbing, to say the least. It's not giving families information they need. And that's where I have an issue. The wider community doesn't know. And they're leaving. They're starting to leave now to file to be a homeschool.
Thanks, Liz. I think we clearly are not yet of one mind about this. And I think that Emily, I'm going to say what I think, sort of building on what Liz said. I think one of the things that, and you described it as encourage you to make the motion. I think the dearth of information, it's totally understandable and totally reasonable that the information that's been coming out is about the hybrid model and about the in-purpose, because that's what all the pressure and all the focus has been on. Interestingly, what our teachers chose to do when the 1% program opened up for the year was to focus almost totally. I don't remember one not remote. There might have been one or two special ed that were not remote, but I remember almost all of them were to develop remote learning opportunities and courses and modes or models, whatever. I'm not sure what to call them, but you know what I mean. That's what the work. That's where the work was done, and I think that I'm hesitant to call for a vote because I know we're not going to be united on this, and I'm not sure that. And that's not a reason not to vote, obviously, but I like that we've been able to come to consensus on almost everything that we've had to face this year, these difficult choices. And this one reflects the basic focus on whether, on how much we're hearing from the teachers about their apprehension, because they're the ones that are at risk. Those are the people that we're going to be putting at risk. And so what I'm wondering is, can we ask Andy to ask the principals to contact the teachers who did the 1% projects to consider, not for the principals to do the work, but to ask the teachers to consider putting together a Zoom description, or maybe modeling or acting out some of the things that they did, and have each school, with the teachers that were doing that work, to put some examples on a Zoom meeting so that people can see it, and notify all the parents that we have that contact information. It wouldn't require anything of the administration other than asking the teachers to do it. The teachers wouldn't have to do it if they didn't want to. It's not in the contract that they have to do something like this. But I have a feeling we would get a large amount of support, and we could put out a really vivid, a vital, authentic representation of what it's going to look like in each of the schools. We've got that material, those materials. We've got the people that can do that. And rather than the administrators are clearly uncomfortable with this. And again, you know, my prejudice is that the pressure coming down on them from the agency is what directs way more of their work than other sources of pressure, because that's who we have to answer to in the end. But we do need to get this information out to people. It's not fair to offer a choice when you don't know what one of the choices is. Many people are choosing commercial online alternatives because they can, and those are kids that are not going to be in our schools. So I'm not going to move to table Emily's motion, because she's raised it and we've talked about it, and if she wants to vote on it, we'll take a vote and we'll go with that. And I agree with Thomas that it's not, I think it's really clear, based on Kelly's concern, it's really clear that this is the board asking the administration to do this based on what's best for the family, depending on what the family decides. It's nobody else that's deciding that. I think that's fairly clear. But so I guess what I'm saying is that would we rather ask Andy to ask the administrators to recruit some teachers to put together Zoom presentations about what remote learning is going to look like, rather than pass this motion, which doesn't really, well, I won't say any more about that. And Emily wanted to respond, so please, Emily, go ahead.
You know, I feel two ways about it. One is I do think before we even promoted a remote option, there has to be more information. And I like this idea of the Zoom and giving people, you know, kind of more of a feeling of what their kids would be attending to online, or what the structures would be. I still see the motion as pretty, you know, comparatively to how much information has come out about the in-person option, I still feel it's very heavily weighted. So, I mean, I don't see this motion as, I kind of agree with Thomas. I thought it was actually pretty bland. But I'm hearing now, I mean, we've heard from a lot of different folks that they don't feel it's so bland, and that they feel that, you know, it has much more teeth, or I don't know. But I guess my question to you, David, would be, if we put out a bunch of information about, I'm almost like, I would be okay to table it if there's a table date. And actually I have another motion, but people are going to kill me. But the other motion would request a special meeting. So maybe we just table it to the special meeting, because I don't want it to be tabled forever and then have, like, you know, just a little bit of information come out about remote and then feel like people still don't have a choice. So I'm just
special meeting on remote, on the remote option.
I would table it until the special meeting on, well, my other motion is
So
not
can
on remote.
I interject just a piece around it? And this is where I want to be really careful around mission creepy stuff and the business of kind of having to run the schools. And I want to caution decisions being made that may directly impact our ability to effectively run and staff the schools. And so if we're predicating parental choice upon Zoom presentations from teachers that we would have to notify and then contact, and then expect to kind of a turnaround time of what would an effective presentation look like, we would want people to spend the time doing that. That may take several days to do so. Our principals are sending information out, especially at the elementary levels, this weekend, Friday through this weekend. We need to start building class rosters around what these things are, because we have to staff things. And so we need some baseline within things. And if we continue to host a special meeting, or if we continue to go around and around on some of the topics, and I just want to kind of bring us back to some of, like, there's some key operational tenets with the school that we have to have. We got to find the kids. And that's the driving factor. And so that's got to be the information that the principals are sending out is, while it's not a tome of information, and it does provide a sense of what does the day look like, how does the day constructed, but we have to kind of get to a point where we're moving, because there's a logistical and operational aspect of things that we could be making some decisions here. I'm just cautioning against making some decisions here that may create a difficult situation for us to effectively manage and run the schools, just in terms of timelines and decisions and what decisions would look like. And so while it may feel like there's not a lot of information, there is information that's come out of the schools, and the principals are sending out more information more now. And again, I still want to extend the invitation to the principals too, to if you want to go, I understand it.
I mean, in that, I know we're not supposed to be responding back and forth, so, you know, David, you can stop me. If that's the case where it feels like it's a rush, or we can't give out information about remote, then I'm not willing to remove the tabling, because not that it's a negotiation, but like, I feel it's really important that people get information on remote learning, and it hasn't been expressed. And the only way to do it at this point then seems to be to say, like, we're promoting remote learning, or we're prioritizing that for families who it makes sense for. It's very broad, and then they'll have to get information. So that's kind of my perspective, is like, I feel like a little bit in a corner of, like, we're not getting the information out to families that I feel like is fair and is requested by the community. So I guess I'd keep my motion on the table then, unfortunately, because I know it's a little bit of a split board.
Okay, I'm going to, I think we have had a really full discussion, and the reason that we have Robert's rules and have motions is so that we can make these kinds of decisions. So I think that I don't see any more board hands to comment. And so I'm going to ask once more, any other comments from the board on this issue? Hearing none, please unmute. And actually, I think we're going to have to roll call so that we can get an accurate count. So I'm going to go down the line here. It's alphabetical by first name, sorry. Emily, do you vote in favor?
David, can you have the motion read back, please?
Yes, thank you. Thomas, would you reread the motion? Thanks,
Yep.
Kelly.
Administration and board will encourage remote learning in all outreach to families when remote learning is in the best interests of the family.
Thank you. So, Emily, how do you vote?
Support.
Kelly?
I'll support it.
Liz?
I support it.
Anne?
Support it.
Carrie, you're on this list. Michelle?
Because of the amendment and the wording, I support it.
Sean?
I will support it also.
Thomas?
I support it.
Thank you. Tim?
Let's make it unanimous.
Okay, and we did Emily. Yeah, we've done everyone, and me, and I support it. Jackie is not here this evening. So it does pass 9-0. Is there any other business that needs to come before the board this evening?
I don't believe so. So I would entertain a motion from a Vernon member to adjourn, or I move that the Vernon Town School Board adjourn at 8:52. Do we have a second?
Chad seconds.
Thank you, Chad. All those in favor of Vernon adjourning, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, go put your kids to bed. Thank you, guys. Anne, I think I need you as an SU member to make your favorite motion.
Madam Chair, there being no further business before this board, I move that we adjourn and that anyone so inclined raise a glass to Ruth Barton tonight.
Oh.
Can it be a very large glass?
Bottle.
Yeah. I take it that's your second, Michelle? You were seconding? Okay. So now it's all those in favor of the SU board adjourning at 8:53, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
David, you're left.
Yeah, I just also want to, anyone that would like to stay, particularly, no, Anne and Sean especially, and anyone else that worked with Ruth Barton, who invented the language that Anne uses to close our meetings. Stick around for a minute or two afterwards and see what we might want to try to put together. Share an update on her condition. So, yes. Motion to
remember, Bethany had said a long time ago.
Oh
that
yeah, she had a question.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Bethany, when there's a motion to adjourn, it takes precedence, but Emily's correct and you did ask to be heard, so please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm glad that you caught me before you put that motion on, David. I was just sitting here going, are you kidding me? I had a whole big list of things. I am, Andy, I'm hoping that you're still on, and I have really enjoyed watching your background change throughout the meetings in different places. I will shoot a message directly to Andy with some of those because I don't need to take up time with that. My specific thing is actually a board request. It's a request of the board and actually of the schools. And so I'm just going to make it really quick. It doesn't even have to be a question. In order to find the agenda for this meeting that had the Zoom call and the password, I had to go to the WSESU page and I had to click about 4 or 5 different through pages to get to the agenda to get to the Zoom call. And nobody that I talked to even knew that this meeting was going on because it was so not well advertised. So my request, I know there's a committee that apparently is starting with communications, but especially right now with COVID, I'm just, I guess not even requesting, I'm begging that there be better posting about meetings and that you use all avenues possible, whether that includes Facebook events or, you know, more broad listing and maybe putting it directly at the very top of the supervisory union page that there's a meeting and here's the link, because I feel like it's like so difficult to figure out how to even that the meeting's happening and how to get to the meeting. And it should be like the very most important thing that is getting put out there right now is that there's a meeting with information that parents, teachers, and all stakeholders should have. So I'm just putting a huge, massive request on the behalf of all the different parents and teachers that I spoke with that didn't even know this meeting was happening and didn't know how to get to it, that be an extreme focus of this board going forward, that information is gotten out to people about when the meetings are, how to get into the meetings, and that just is an extreme focus, because it has not been up until now. And I'm not saying that as a critique, I'm just begging that becomes something that's super important. Thank you for giving me a chance to say that. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bethany. It's a critique that we have all made and been making for months. And I'm glad to say that steps are being taken. I want to have Michelle lay out some of the specifics, but at our next meeting in 2 weeks, we will hear from the Communications Council, and we will, I'm sure, have a series of motions to do almost everything that you just said. So thank you. And Michelle, would you want to provide some specifics around that?
Yeah, just in the immediate, our intention, and I really just needed to run this by for some legal official business, because I need some guidance there. The intention is to create and work on the website. We have a plan for that, because it's not easy to navigate. Create a new communication system sign-up list where people can sign up to get a robocall, or be on an email list to specifically get these agendas and links sent to their email, or get that phone call as a reminder. And we plan on a social media page, hopefully can be created within the next week, where it will be just a place that mirrors what we see on the website. I will create all the links, any official publicized statements coming from it. It won't be a place to interact with the board or anything, but it will mirror the information to make it more accessible to the public. Events will be created, and then we will go out of our way to share it in all of the community forums that we are aware of. So that's immediately on the table, and there's more. We really spent several hours brainstorming, and we're eager to see improvement with community engagement.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Can't believe how excited we are to hear all this.
I'm excited.
So again, I'll ask Ann to have the motion to adjourn, and for people who want to talk about Ruth a little bit afterwards, please stick around. It'll be ex officio for sure. So Ann, please.
Mr. Chairman, there being no further business before this board, I move that we adjourn.
Second, please.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? I don't think we do discussion on this. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night, everyone.
Next time.